This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Why are we upset if we're creating jobs?
Inflation's still a thing out there for the everyday consumer.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
The economic calendar jam-packed today.
And Michael Barr with news.
Tensions between the U.S. and China have heated up even more.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, and Lisa Mateo. Mr. Sweeney out, starting his holiday shopping, Christmas shopping, and Damian Sassower in today, which is a really good day. Yields back to 4%, dollar strength, all sorts of news flow this morning. We'll get to the sports later on here, but really Damian Sassower front and center with oil almost getting to $80 a barrel are the tensions in the Eastern Mediterranean.
That's exactly right. And we've seen some action in the markets there. I mean, a lot of bullish call options being bought for Brent crude, $100 and above. We didn't see that last year at this time, and we know what happened 1 year ago, Tom.
You look at the way oil moves here, of course, then you go to gold as well. Gold up $8, $26.75 into earnings season, a churn as well. But the cover on dollar, Damian, how much carnage was there? Because the smart people were certain we would see strong yen, we would see weak dollar.
The valley of the dollar smile was very narrow indeed. I mean, Bloomberg Dollar Index up every single day last week. It was up 1.6% last week. It's now up 2.1% year to date.
Margin calls?
I don't think so yet, but we do have to talk about the plumbing of the front end of the U.S. Market here. I mean, SOFR Fed fund spreads blew out on the heels of the NFP print on Friday. That's something to talk about. We have a lot of T-bill issuance through the end of this year. We got to look at that.
Lisa was working aisle 7 at Costco, worried about the front end of the short-term paper market this week. We'll get to that in a moment. We say good morning. An incredible week coming up. Damian Sassower with us too many times this week. It's a good thing as well. Huge political stories. Jack Fitzpatrick will be with us later on. Some equity people to chat up. Dow, 42,000, 5,700, rounded up 5,800 on the SPX. From the Interactive Broker Studios, our Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
You got it. We've got stocks slipping right now. We have yields extending their rise. Strong economic data push traders placing their bets on how much the Fed might cut interest rates this year. Goldman Sachs economists say the probability for a recession over the next year back at the long-term average of 15%. Today, we'll get an update on consumer credit. Later this week, though, that's when we get the latest read on inflation, September's Consumer Price Index. That comes out on Thursday. So let's head over to futures right now. We have NASDAQ futures down 0.6%, 134 points. We have Dow futures down 0.4%. S&P futures down about 0.5%. To the bond market, with the 2-year and the 10-year yield gap inverts for the first time since September 18th. Right now, we have the 2-year at 4.02%. That's up 10 basis points. A yield on the 10-year 4.01%, and that's up 4 basis points. To commodities, have to point out oil erased an earlier loss. Tensions in the Middle East rising. We have Brent crude $79 a barrel, WTI crude $76 a barrel. Banks kicking off earnings season this week. We have reports from JPMorgan Chase, Wells Fargo, BlackRock. That takes place on Friday. PepsiCo, they'll be out with their latest numbers tomorrow, and all eyes on Tesla later in the week. It has a robo-taxi event, and Bloomberg reporting some of the surprises could include AI, new revenue streams, new vehicle models, and charging infrastructure. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Damian.
Lisa, thanks so much. You get so many topics here on economics, finance, investment, on fractured international relations. Oh, yes, an election here in a number of days. We weren't sure how to start the show, but you work around his schedule. Dan Williams, with a really interesting pedigree out of Oxford, was with the Jerusalem Post. We are thrilled that he gives us coverage at Bloomberg News. The last time we spoke to Mr. Williams was on the border of Lebanon. He comes from Jerusalem this morning. Dan, I looked at the Jerusalem Post this morning. The immediacy you see in the Israeli press, much different than in America. Is there any place in Israel safe in a two-border war? From the 116 miles from Lebanon's southern border to the Gaza Strip, can anyone sleep in Israel safe at night from potential missile attack?
Well, I don't think you need my word for it. Good morning, everyone. You look at the map the Israeli military issued just 6 days ago when Iran launched 180 ballistic missiles in the direction of Israel. That is the latest front in this 7-front war. And the entire country was carpeted with alert signs. Basically, I think the Israelis knew where the Iranians were trying to hit. But what happens in a situation like that is the interceptions themselves become hazardous because ballistic missiles are fired at great height, they're intercepted at great height, and the debris is scattered a great distance. So even if you're out of range of Gaza, or you're out of range of Hezbollah from Lebanon, or you're out of range of, say, Iranian-backed militias in Iraq or Syria, or the Houthis in Yemen, you could still find yourself at the receiving end of debris from a successful interception. So that's the long answer. The short answer is no.
Dan Williams with us in Israel. Joining us this morning, Dan, is Damian Sassower. Damian?
Yeah, no, Dan, I need to know. We saw Bibi on the tape over the weekend specifically calling out French President Macron for, potentially recommending an arms embargo on Israel. I mean, is that real? And is there any chance that we could see other G7 nations follow suit?
We've been hearing subterranean rumors about this for quite a few months now. I have a good friend who's involved in the Belgian civil service. He told me this could be in the works some 6 months ago. The French foreign minister is now in town. In fact, he'll be briefing the press just an hour from now, so we'll be getting some clarification, I believe. But there have been indications denied by Germany and been indications that German export licenses have been delayed, that the Brits are more closely inspecting some defense export licenses to Israel. So yes, there is a slow gathering of pressure through the channels of defense exports to Israel as European nations try to figure out a way to apply pressure on Israel to cease fire without completely rupturing their ties with Israel.
Wow, Dan, how serious is that? I mean, Bibi specifically called out the axis of resistance in that speech and, specifically accused Emmanuel Macron of, being divisive and showing a lack of support, whereas the axis of resistance remains strong. Talk to us about the U.S. and their role. Talk to us about Kamala Harris, former President Trump. What's their stance on Israel?
Well, I'd suggest you pass the statements they put out on this anniversary day. Very strong statements in support of Israel by the president and the vice president. The vice president, Harris, in an interview did reiterate her call for a ceasefire as soon as possible. That's pretty much a stock position of the Democratic establishment of this administration. The problem is it falls on deaf ears in Israel because Israel has been through several ceasefires, both with Hezbollah, with Hamas, I think at least 5 times with Hamas. And basically each ceasefire has seen reconstruction money, aid money coming in, and Hamas diverting a good deal of it to rebuilding its military capacity. And in the end of the day, Israel points out correctly that these are enemies backed by Iran, all of which are ideologically committed to its destruction, all of which openly say that when conditions allow, they'll resume the war against Israel until achieving that destruction of Israel. So Israel's position now, having undergone really an unprecedented attack on October 7th of last year, a game-changing attack, if you like, Israel is now changing the rules of the game, and it's saying no more ceasefires, we want victory. The question is, what does victory look like? No one has fully articulated that yet.
Dan, how has Netanyahu's popularity shifted? BBC has a nice summary of that, of the different fractious parties in a parliamentary system. How has Netanyahu's popularity shifted?
His popularity has been in the doldrums for a year now, given this catastrophe, especially given that he is Israel's longest-serving prime minister and long cast himself as Mr. Security, the guy who can foresee threats to Israel and to the Jewish people. So he suffered badly in the polls. However, over the past month, Israel has clearly seized the initiative, specifically in Lebanon, with an audacious series of attacks, some claimed, some unclaimed. I'm sure you're aware of the beeper sabotage, the walkie-talkie sabotage, the cascade of precision strikes to effectively decapitate Hezbollah and degrade its missile capacity. So polls have indicated a lift for him, especially when compared to his likeliest rivals. However, the national religious bloc that he sits astride, and everything in Israel is coalition politics, is still not seen winning an election were one held today. He's not keen on seeing an election anytime soon.
Right.
The next one is scheduled for 2026. However, his personal approval rates are certainly improving.
Dan, thank you so much. Look forward to speaking to you again, reporting from Jerusalem for Bloomberg News. Dan Williams. Market's a little bit light right now. Futures negative 27. VIX out 2 points, 21.22. With our news in New York City is Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Damian, Lisa. Israelis are holding vigils and somber ceremonies to mark a year since Hamas's October 7th, 2023 attack. the deadliest in the country's history since the Holocaust. The attack sparked the war in Gaza. Bloomberg Israel Bureau Chief Ethan Bronner is following the latest developments from Tel Aviv.
This day has been set aside, as you can imagine, by Israeli officials and the families of hostages and all sorts of organizations as a day of mourning and commemoration. And an hour or two ago, Hamas in Khan Yunis in the southern central part of Gaza Strip were able to, despite a year of war against them, send off a bunch of long-range missiles to hit Tel Aviv. I mean, they were, of course, stopped by the Iron Dome system, but we were all rushed into bomb shelters, something that hasn't happened in months.
Bloomberg Israel Bureau Chief Ethan Bronner. The 2024 Atlantic hurricane season has reached named storm number 13. Milton is gathering strength in the Gulf of Mexico. For the second time in as many weeks, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has put his state's Gulf Coast under a storm surge watch.
You're not going to be able to be told with 100-degree certainty where this storm is going to go this far out.
All indications point to a major hurricane striking around Tampa Bay Wednesday night. Milton is already a Category 2 storm with 100-mile-per-hour winds as it churns in the Gulf. The Nobel Prize in Medicine has been awarded to Americans Victor Ambrose and Gary Ruvkun for their discovery of microRNA, a fundamental principle governing how gene activity is regulated. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Damian, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. Got 8 ways to go here right now. I think we'll do the sports here in a moment. Major shout out to the Combine of Massachusetts Institute of Technology Medicine. These two winners of the Nobel Prize today, absolute heavyweights out of MIT, Harvard, and out of Dartmouth as well. And this is the axis, Damian Sassower, from Boston out to Worcester, and of Massachusetts General out to the medical compound of UMass in Worcester, Massachusetts. This is, I'm going to say, 40 miles outside Boston. But I can't say enough about this. And the linkage back to when I was an amateur in this is Dr. Ambrose took his PhD with David Baltimore.
Well, you know, I'm
whole heritage.
I mean, Tom, I'm more interested in seeing the Nobel Prizes for chemistry, for literature as the week progresses. But to your point, I mean, the talent that's coming out of the Boston area, save for baseball, is notable to say the least.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. There was not a Nobel Prize on Jersey Street.
Or football.
This year. Keep it up. It's just going great. We say good morning, 92.9 FM. Congratulations to the University of Massachusetts Combine.
Congratulations.
That is out there. Futures a negative 28. Damian, I look at the tape and I see a massive fake, 50 beeps. In we go. Weak dollar. What a reversal we've seen.
Absolutely.
Whiplash.
I mean, the risk of 50 bips has fallen sharply. But, you know, if you look at the options market and you look what's priced into June of next year, the range, Tom, it could be, Fed funds could be anywhere from 3% to 4.5%. That's a massive, massive range.
So do you stand aside or do you commit capital on a bet right now?
Well, I think, you know, it depends how strongly you feel about that bet. But certainly there's money to be made there. That is a wide range for outcomes. And so from my perspective, you know, the market, I mean, VIX here at 21 plus, I mean, these are notable levels here, and I think there's going to be a little bit of activity as we head into the election season and year end.
The currency market, what does it signal to you?
Dollar strength. I think, you know, the dollar's had its dollar resilience is a better word for it, for sure. I mean, all this rally in the funding currencies, Japan, China, and whatnot, you know, I think that's going to reverse a little bit.
Damian Sassower with us today. Lots to talk about. Jeffrey Hughes scheduled in a bit. Bloomberg surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this Bloomberg Business Flash brought to you by Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer focuses the power of their thinking on you, creating customized plans to help achieve your goals. Put the power of Oppenheimer thinking into your investing. Call an Oppenheimer professional today. All right, we have futures on the right as tensions in the Middle East dampen optimism about the state of the U.S. economy. So let's get to the futures right now. We have NASDAQ futures down 0.6%, 136 points. We have Dow futures down 0.4%, 183 points, and S&P futures down about 0.5%. Over to the two-year yield, 4.01%. That's up 8 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 4.01%, and that's up 4 basis points. Few companies making news. Boeing, its largest union, will be back at the bargaining table later today. That's along with a federal mediator. They're hoping to end that strike by the company's West Coast factory workers. And the car company behind Jeep and Dodge, they're suing its union. They're going to head off a possible strike, hopefully. Stellantis accusing the United Auto Workers of planning to violate last year's contract agreement, rules out mid-contract walkouts. And finally, Chevron agreed to sell its stakes in oil sands and shale assets to Canadian Natural Resources for $6.5 billion. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Damian.
Lisa, thanks so much. Damian, JPMorgan, last 10 years, you ready?
Yeah.
With dividends reinvested, 16.5% per year. I did not expect that.
Well, we have earnings on Friday, right? I mean, are they one of the first? Yeah, no, absolutely.
Before that, in a conversation, Lisa Abramowitz in conversation with James Dimon. Jamie, 16.5% per year, last 10 years.
And by the way, I mean, I'm waiting to see what Jamie's thinking about ahead of this election. I mean, there's been a lot of fake news, a lot of news out there, both ways. Is he going to go Republican? Is he going to go Democrat? I don't know if he's even going to announce one way or the other.
Will he endorse? What is he, Springsteen?
I'm curious. I mean, this guy matters to me.
We'll see tomorrow, 9:30 a.m. Bramo in conversation with Jamie Dimon. Look for that as well. Right now, Jeffrey Yu joins senior strategist BNY on the state of play. What's the whipsaw factor this morning, Jeffrey, in the correlated disaster of strong yen certitude, weak dollar? That worked out. What's the whipsaw factor on a Monday morning?
Well, I guess, never bet against U.S. exceptionalism, right? That's a kind of a message, that you'd think markets would know by now, but that, I guess, is not the case. Of course, you always need to risk manage, and I'm sure that, when I look at my own currency calls and the extent of dollar overweights and U.S. overweights out there are probably higher than what makes people comfortable with. But I think, again, this is a lesson when it comes to data, follow the data and be prepared to be hit by it. And when it comes to the U.S., the risk is always to the upside.
Jeffrey, I'd love you to put your options hat on for me here. I mean, geopolitical risk is not something that has been, in people's sort of, target zone for the better part of the last year. But now we have, a lot of buying, volume of bullish Brent calls, $100 and above, rising here. Do you think that what's going on in the Middle East will actually impact oil production?
Well, at this point, I think if you think about options and these positions are on for tail risk, I guess net, that is a sign of greater concern because, when you're adding insurance, so to speak, paying premium in a lower yield environment or potentially lower yield environment, then you're actually eating more of your potential returns, on insurance, so then you actually have to take the view that the tail risk or the probabilities of that will be higher than previously expected. It's easy to put on, I would say, tail risk, hedges, when a dollar cash rate is giving you a plus 5%. But if that's going to go down to 4 or even less, depending on what pricing you look at, then I guess it is a different situation. Having said that, I think it is going to be a tactical situation, and it's not just the Middle East at this point. Global geopolitics, that's always going to be a factor. So heading into year end, when it's been a good risk on year, I guess people can afford, based on the current returns right now, to add a little bit of premium to those insurance plays.
And Jeffrey, I look at SOFR option markets here, and I look at June of 2025, and I see the range out there, and I'm just curious to hear your thoughts. Do you see that range sort of narrowing? I mean, can it stay this wide for an extended period of time? What are your thoughts there?
Well, I think overall Fed expectations, if I had to take a view, it would be towards a narrowing for the time being. But again, pending for fresh data, our view was that even after the September meeting, I think the market acknowledged the Fed, and well, the equity market acknowledged the Fed, but rates markets did not. There was still aggressive pricing of Fed easing, and almost believing that equity markets required that. But now, based on earnings, based on where the consumer is, equity markets, do not need sufficient Fed support or too much Fed support to really make the case for gains in their own right. So I think that should have chastened where the SOFR markets were, and that would be the case for some time to come.
Surveillance jargon alert. We're going to cut Damian some slack. He hasn't slept since 4 p.m. Saturday. But the SOFR is like the new LIBOR, which is the inside
the securitized overnight funding rate. That's correct.
Jeff, for you, let's bring it back to mere mortals. Money's still flowing into money market funds. Why?
Well, overall U.S. rates, they're still well above what people have been used to over the last 2 cycles. So that will be the case. And now, given where cash rates are going to be higher for longer, and also, dare I say, the dollar is, I agree with Damian though, the dollar is going to be resilient, for some time to come. Global investors, they'd be happy to continue managing their liquidity by dollars rather than looking for alternatives.
Jeff, for you now on China. Jeff, I look at where we are. We're turning in the passports of teachers or whatever the political news was here within a Marxist-Leninist state. Can China have the courage to get magnitude on monetary and particularly fiscal salvation?
Well, let's see what the press conference says tomorrow afternoon. But the prior reports for cash handouts to families, that is them ticking the magnitude box. This could cost up anywhere between 500 billion to 1 trillion renminbi in a relatively, from their point of view, from the Ministry of Finance's point of view, fiscally stretched environment. If fiscally stretched environment is their base case, they're still willing to go all out on this, then it is a sign of conviction. They do want to turn a household sentiment around. But defeating deflation, as Japan has shown, it's about higher wages. It's about raising expectations. It's not about reducing debt servicing. It's about raising your income growth. That, I think, is the missing element. And to kickstart that, we need to hear more from Beijing.
Jeff, I love that you went there. $1 trillion of new stimulus. Actually, it's 2.1 yuan of stimulus, but 1.2 trillion is sort of redundant. But that 1 trillion of new stimulus to households, I mean, what does that do from the perspective of a foreign investor looking at the sort of fundamentals of China, all the debt to GDP that's out there? I mean, we're talking elevated levels here. Do you think that can impact the renminbi here?
Well, I think renminbi, dollar renminbi upside or weaker renminbi in a deflationary environment, that's something Beijing would be comfortable with anyway, right? So that would serve as a stimulus, especially for exporters, facing the weak PPI numbers. But I just keep on going back to the household, to your point, and seeing the reaction, not just in Chinese consumer goods names, but for international companies, with exposure to the Chinese household. They will hope to get a fillip from higher spending. Right. But again, deflation's hard to pull out from, so just caution your expectations there.
Jeff, 30 seconds. Then are you a 5% GDP optimist on China?
They will hit the 5% growth target this year, and I hope it's through high nominal growth rather than through a negative deflator. Right now, they are on track.
What you just heard there, folks, is an absolute clinic on the distinction of linking policy into fiscal strategy, monetary strategy. You got to solve it at the nominal top line level. Jeff, for you, thank you so much with BNY. Just brilliant, absolutely brilliant this morning. At some point, they ignore the renminbi, the yuan. Yeah. They have so many other problems. Bracketing the yuan just is not a priority.
Well, I mean, look, they're coming back from holiday tomorrow. So, a lot of these numbers we see in the CSI 300, the equity gauge in China may be a little bit, inflated here. I mean, once they come back in, we had a 16.3%. The equity index in China was up 16.3% the week before last.
Goldman Sachs put an overlay on it this
Best week ever. And right now, Goldman's saying it can go another 20% from these levels. I guess it can, but I'm suspect here.
Do you watch the yuan or do you watch something else when Damian Sassower gauges China?
Well, I definitely watch the yuan, but I watch the offshore yuan. I like dollar CNH. Yeah. And it's 707 last. It briefly dipped below the 7 handle, but it didn't quite get there.
We'll come to that. This is important. CNY versus CNH. CNY was great. And then, Neil Young joined and it was a little, there's some tension to say. I like they were doing a thing this weekend, Neil Young and Stephen Stills. Huh? They're out there. They're working. They're not mailing it in. Look how we see, that's why you're here, Damian. We go from
thread.
CNH to Crosby, Stills, Nash, Young. If you're still listening, we're on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast after your commute. Watch us on YouTube. Across this nation, Android Auto, Apple CarPlay, on the corner, Washington. I'm missing Philadelphia here. Washington, New York, good morning.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We have futures falling, and this is after the Dow jumped to a record on Friday. It came after last week's blowout U.S. jobs number, undercut chances of a big rate cut in November. Today, we'll get some insight on what sort of spending power consumers will have heading into the holiday season with an update on consumer credit. Later this week, we get the latest reading on inflation with CPI for September. Now, that's expected to have kept up its August pace. We'll head to NASDAQ futures down 0.6%. Dow futures down 0.4%. Same for S&P futures. As far as the two-year yield, 4.01%. That's up 8 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 4.00% too, and that's up 3 basis points. We'll head over to commodities. We'll have to point out Brent crude, $79 a barrel. WTI crude, $76 a barrel. And we have spot gold higher at $2,657 an ounce. Stocks on the move. That would be Pfizer, up 3%. Sources saying activist investor Starboard Value takes a $1 billion stake in the company. And Arcadium Lithium, that's up 30%. There's news that Rio Tinto has made a non-binding takeover approach. And finally, Cartier owner Richemont, up nearly 1% in Switzerland. It agreed to sell its e-commerce arm to online luxury platform My Teresa in an all-share deal. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Damian.
You snuck that in there. Are they selling Cartier in aisle 7 at Costco?
No.
They got gold, they got platinum. Why not?
They can't do it.
Okay, interesting. All I know is China is, everybody says in luxury, it's all about China.
Yes.
It's just that simple. Jeffrey, thank you so much for that. Nice. I think this may be the conversation of the day. Henrietta Treyz with us. She's a grizzled veteran of the Capital Wars with Veda Partners. Love having her on. Can have her on 5 days a week. Do something about that, Giuseppe's father. Let's get Henrietta on 5 days a week. Henrietta, Nate Cohn has a fabulous article in the New York Times on polling. And there's two polls. There's regular polls like Bloomberg's wonderful poll, what we've got on New York Times, CNN, that. And then there's other polls where they say, how'd you vote 4 years ago? And there's some real mathematical gyrations Nate Cohn goes through. Do you look at the polls, Henrietta Treyz?
Oof, I sure do, all day, every day, whether I like it or not. I am right there neck deep in the polls all day. Nate Cohn is excellent to follow. I think he, like me, is in the position where we have to talk about some new angle every single day, if we can, about polls that are telling us a really consistent story, which is that this is a really close race. You want to drill down into really key segments. Right. I think we're all sweating the small stuff right now.
How does former President Trump increase turnout?
Well, you have Elon Musk tweet that today is the last day to vote in Georgia and other states, register to vote rather in Georgia and other states. So that's one way. Go directly to the young male audience, which is where Trump has seen so much of his growth in the last year. They are focused on the young Black male audience, young Latino male audience, and it's really a notable gender divide gap where Trump is sticking right with turnout in those core demographics. He is increasingly getting focused on and maintaining focus on sort of this dark narrative, America in decline, immigration as a major negative in the United States, and that's geared towards turning out a very specific set of groups. The risk is that it alienates sort of suburban voters, married voters in the suburbs of states nationwide in these critical swing states.
Henrietta, you mentioned Georgia. I'd like to broaden that perspective out a bit and talk about the 7 swing states. Is it still Roe v. Wade? I mean, what do the polls tell you? I mean, do they suggest that national security, on the border is an issue? What do they think about what's going on in the Middle East also?
Yeah, I've been saying this for months now, but this race is immigration versus abortion, hence the gender divide. Not that either of those issues are gender biased, but that's the way it's shaped up. So if you ask Republicans what the number one issue is, overwhelmingly they say it's immigration and the southern border and crime. On the Democratic side, if you ask them what the number one issue is, it's abortion. The negative for Trump is that it used to be economy and inflation, which would give voters 2 reasons to vote for Donald Trump. But since Harris has gotten on the scene on August 3rd, polls have never gone back and she's been improving. And now in some cases, polls are finding her ahead of Donald Trump on both the economy and inflation. So his negative is that he's lost the economy argument, which is really remarkable given we had the first bout of inflation in the United States for 40 years on Biden's tenure with Harris. So I think that's something that the Trump team in focusing on immigration has really diluted substantially. And so abortion is what the Democrats are voting on. And that's in key races, Montana, right, Florida, Nevada, et cetera.
Henrietta, it's been 1 year to the date since you speak about borders, Hamas crossing the border into Israel. I just want to ask your opinion on this. Harris, Trump, do you think there's any possibility that one or the other could, kind of sanction Israel in terms of, limiting the amount of arms being shipped to them if either one of them are in office? Is that even a distinct possibility here?
Oh, definitely. As you know, Biden was able to restrict arms back in May, if I'm not mistaken. So it's something that the administration can do. But when I speak with third-party voters, when I speak with folks who are mostly concerned about the war in the Middle East, a big piece of this is that the appropriations bills continue to go out and Congress remains overwhelmingly supportive of Israel. So whether the president wants to stop arms or not, a lot of these decisions are not up to him. The sheer volume of dollars, continued emergency appropriations bills, which we'll get again in December, are going to have tens of billions for Israel and for Ukraine and other emergencies like the FEMA disasters in the South right now.
I'm seeing that. We had someone in here the other day shrinking the undecided down to 3%. And I actually saw something this weekend, Henrietta Treyz, agreeing with that. Is it really that? Is it really that few undecideds?
Yes, it is. 3-4% is about as big as you can get. If you can go into certain states and find 11% now, it's sort of a Christmas miracle. People have made their decision, and the undecided voters are most likely going to be folks that just don't go out, that just don't vote on November 5th.
Well, they don't vote. So the
right.
bottom line is, well, let me ask the same question. How is Vice President Harris getting the turnout?
Well, I think you could see from today, for example, to keep it on the Middle East, you had 25 imams that came out and said, we are endorsing Kamala Harris. Those are across sort of key swing states in Philadelphia, New York. Any pockets where you might have concern, the 700,000 Muslim population in the United States, 300,000 of which are in Michigan, really need to be given a good rationale to go and vote for the Democratic ticket and contrast what it might be for Republicans and Trump at the top of the ticket. So there's a lot of very niche campaigning going on that we usually don't see. Usually we see these broad appeals to huge swaths of the population, but both Trump and Harris are going sort of very micro right now.
Well, we know Biden's going to take a trip abroad here. I mean, anything you're expecting here on student loans and student loan relief ahead of his trip?
That's not even on the radar. Do you think that's a topic?
Well, I paid off my loans, but I'm curious.
Yeah,
I mean, I definitely think it's a topic for households.
But Damian's brilliant here, Henrietta. Is all this side stuff like the SALT tax that Damian pays? I mean, you're paying $200,000.
SALT taxes, student loans, these are real issues. Henrietta, tell us about this.
They're real issues, Henrietta, but are they real issues now?
I'm sorry. I have to say, I love SALT all day, every day. I talk about it all the time. I mean, this is a $1.2 trillion revenue raiser. That's not small beans.
Student loans?
Student loans is also a really big deal. I think the fact that we're even saying those words, though, is something that helps the Biden narrative or the Harris narrative. But to be fair, and I think to the broader point, Congress is out of session. They're not passing any legislation for the next month. None of this is happening. They won't even be back until about Thanksgiving. So to expect some massive influx is unrealistic. But certainly everybody's going to be jawboning. If you listen to the Call Her Daddy podcast or any of the others that are about to come up in this blitz the next week, both Trump and Harris are fully out there trying to appeal to whatever constituencies will have them right now.
Henrietta, go away. Henrietta Treyz, Veda Partners. We hope to see you again 8 times this week. That's brilliant. I refuse to believe these secondary issues even are in anybody's brain. I'm going to vote for so-and-so because of student loans.
Well, I got to say, I mean, look, just now, Harris is getting dinged because she's promised $157 billion of aid to Lebanon, but people are saying, oh, Hurricane Milton, billions of dollars of damages. How can she send money abroad? But you can't, no right, no wrong. You know, if you're, you know, it's a very fine line right now into November.
I don't know. Look for Damian Sassower's new podcast, Vote Early, Vote Often. We'll have that for you here in a bit. Futures at -27, they deteriorate. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Damian, Lisa. Today marks 1 year since the October 7th attack in Israel by Hamas. More than 1,100 people were killed and more than 200 taken hostage. Yuval Haran visited Kibbutz Be'eri, where his father was killed, and 7 other family members were kidnapped. Many were released at the only hostage swap so far, but 1 remains in captivity.
We can save Tal, and we can save so many of the hostages. Every second that goes by, their life is in danger. Every second, we don't know if it will be the end.
Meanwhile, Hamas fired a barrage of rockets toward Tel Aviv after Israel bombed a number of targets connected to the militant group in Gaza as fighting escalated. As Israel is locked in a multi-front conflict, Vice President Kamala Harris says she won't stop pressuring Israel to end its military campaign in the Middle East. Harris spoke to CBS's 60 Minutes.
The work that we do diplomatically with the leadership of Israel is an ongoing pursuit around making clear our principles, which include the need for humanitarian aid, the need for this war to end, the need for a deal to be done, which would release the hostages and create a ceasefire.
And a reminder, you can catch 60 Minutes every Sunday night on Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington. Meanwhile, former President Trump campaigned in Wisconsin Sunday at the Dodge County Airport in Juneau, his 4th rally in the state in 9 days, mocking his critics.
They said he's a threat to democracy. He wants to be a dictator. No, you know the threat to democracy are when you put incompetent people in charge of our country. That's a real threat to democracy.
Saturday, Trump spoke in Butler, Pennsylvania, where an assassination attempt took place against him. As Hurricane Milton strengthens as it barrels toward Florida, rescue workers are still clearing the debris from the last major storm, Hurricane Helene. Milton is expected to hit midweek. 2 American scientists were awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for the discovery of microRNA, a fundamental principle governing how gene activity is regulated. Victor Ambrose and Gary Rufkin will share the $1.1 million prize. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Damian, Lisa.
If you are enthused, you walk down Broadway past the Johnny Cash Museum and dump the goalposts in the Cumberland River. Joining us now, surveillance Vanderbilt correspondent Damian Sassower.
That's a 2.6 mile, walk, I guess, if you want to call it, carrying those goalposts down from First Bank down to the Cumberland River. I have definitely walked. I've walked back more than I've walked down there, to be honest with you. But let's just take for 1 second. Let's all remember what Nick Saban said about Vanderbilt University. The only place you're going to play in the SEC that's not hard to play, Vanderbilt University, and I got to tell you, that was awesome.
And then you tore down. This is why you can't have nice things. You tore down the whole goalpost, and like Tom said, then you threw it in the river, man.
And you see,
the Athletic has a photograph of the Vandies celebrating. Everyone's wearing Prada.
No, they're not. They're wearing their blue blazers and their khaki pants because Ole Miss and Vandy, from what I understand, are still the only 2 schools left in the country where you go old school classic khakis, blue blazers to every game. I love it. Love it.
I want to know how they did it.
Well, how they got the goalposts off.
How they won.
Oh, it was
No,
the pick
how the
six.
team
No,
won.
it was the pick six. Look, I mean, no Nick Saban, there's going to be a problem. I mean, he should have never thrown that pick six, but that's what set it apart. And then they kind of that defense just held on, you know? I mean, I guess Bama's not all that. Let's cast a bit of shade on him.
I guess that's why the deer were running in my yard, man, from Saturday after the game. I thought I saw them rumble when you were yelling.
Did you get the Mossberg 500 out the kitchen window and try to get, dinner for dinner? Well, let's do it for Damian. We got to do this. Paul
Please
Sweeney and I, we don't care. Damian Sassower cares.
Diego Pavia, this attitude, this program, and the biggest win on the West End. Vanderbilt takes down #1 Alabama. Diego Pavia very nearly went into the stands to celebrate with his brothers, but instead they've come onto the field with him.
Thank you, ESPN,
Oh, my
for
goodness.
that. Greatly appreciate it. There was back to 1969, back to 1984. It's great.
I think they were 0-60 all time versus AP top 5 teams before Saturday. I mean, think about that.
And they're ranked.
No, right, exactly.
Okay, there's your Vanderbilt report today with Vanderbilt alum Damian Sassower from New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Well, with September's blowout jobs report behind us, investor focus shifts this week to the latest readings on inflation with CPI for September. But first, it's a look at consumer credit later this afternoon. Tomorrow, it's a trade balance. Wednesday, we get minutes from the Fed's September meeting. As far as NASDAQ futures, they're down 0.6%, 130 points. We have Dow futures down 0.4% at 42,471. We have S&P futures down 0.4% at 5,773. The two-year yield, 4.01%. That's up 8 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 4.0%, and that's up about 3 basis points. We have shares of Nintendo up 4%. Saudi Arabia's wealth fund, they said it's considering increasing its stakes in Japanese game companies, so that's helping out there. And casino stocks, they're moving higher. Wynn Resorts received a commercial gaming operator license in the United Arab Emirates. We have Wynn Resorts up more than 2%. Las Vegas Sands up nearly 3%. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Damian.
Lisa, thanks so much. Doing it right. Jen Farrow in conversation with Mark Rowan. We had Jim Zelter in last week as well from Apollo here. And Damian, I just want to take a minute and a half here. I think it's important. It's just too good to be true how everything's perfect in private equity, and particularly in private credit. Get the Sassower radar up. What are the challenges for private credit, or is it truly a free lunch?
Well, I'm going to have a bunch of these conversations at the Greenwich Economic Forum over the next 2 days.
That's why I brought it up.
Highly recommend that anybody who has a chance to come and visit us there. We're going to be on site. We're going to be interviewing a lot of people, specifically people from Ares and Guggenheim, private credit experts. But let me say this. Credit spreads in the U.S., my goodness, they have remained resilient. You want to talk about resilient equity markets? Just look at credit. Even with what's just happened with the U.S. Treasuries, with U.S. yields popping up, I mean, spreads have just remained tight throughout. And with the VIX here above 20, again, I'm just not seeing much of it. So, I guess they think the economy is more healthy than the market gives it credit for, perhaps. I don't know.
We'll have to see. That's something we will follow here into 2025.
Now, a look at the front pages. What's making news around the world? Your daily roundup of today's headlines from major publications.
Your daily look at the front pages of Lisa Mateo Hour, brought to you by Interactive Brokers. Their portfolio analysts consolidate, analyze all your financial accounts on one powerful dashboard. Do it for free. Sign up for Portfolio Analyst, ibkr.com/free PA. Once more on a Monday, ibkr.com/free PA. Lisa, what do you got?
All right, we've heard about cost cutting across the media industry, right? Entertainment divisions, trimming episode counts, reducing cast salaries. Well, now it could be affecting TV network news anchor salaries. Sources telling the Wall Street Journal, Disney's ABC, Good Morning America, George Stephanopoulos, Robin Roberts, Michael Strahan, they may be in this fight to keep their deals at where they are. They're about $25 million a year each. They say if NBC Today Show Hoda Kotb, if she hadn't opted to leave, she would have faced a cut to her $20 million a year contract. So they're saying this whole cost cutting is starting to trickle down. MSNBC, you have talks of a new deal with Rachel Maddow, her $30 million per year deal up after the election. So we'll see what happens there. But they're just saying that the days of those media icons, it's coming to an end.
Right.
Like that's going to start.
Are you watching this stuff at home, or are you on YouTube like everybody else?
I was going to ask you to comment on this, Tom. We're talking about media icons here and what they're getting paid. No, but seriously, in all due respect, I have been getting a few calls from ABC and NBC. I mean, they really are hard up, I guess, if they're calling me. So, we'll see. But, I'm very happy here at Bloomberg, sitting next to Tom.
I by chance
collecting
saw
his crumbs.
The other day the ratings for the 6:30 news, the nightly news, was, I'm making this up, 27 million 20 years ago, and they're now down to 18 million, 19 million.
That's a big difference.
So, it's a changing audience, but so much more, Lisa, I would say, time has just marched on from Sarnoff in what Mr. Cronkite, Mr. Huntley, Mr. Brinkley, Frank McGee at ABC, what they invented, and then over to cable, were just decades and decades and decades out. And it seems like the formula is changing.
Yeah, but Lisa, I mean, you look at these podcasts like Smartless, right? Bateman and Artnet. I mean, these guys are killing it, right? So you would think that Stephanopoulos and Michael Strahan, maybe all they got to do, Robin Roberts, all they got to do is start a little podcast.
Let me sell the book here so we can keep eating. YouTube is the future for us folks. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts out on YouTube to keep Lisa Mateo in Costco. But the answer is, there's a newness to the YouTube thing that I'm dazzled by every day. What else do you have?
NFL teams, more of them heading to dome stadiums, and it's driving up the cost. Yeah, so the closed stadiums adds hundreds of millions of dollars construction costs. But here's the thing, not all fans want them. They enjoy the whole football field, being out in the cold. But it's not stopping. The proposals are coming in. 10 of the NFL's 32 teams currently play in those roof stadiums. That's an all-time high. Several more in the works. So more of them starting to come around. They're saying they want the year-round
on the schedule, Damian, are you advantaged by homing in a dome?
Well, here's the thing. The Bloomberg Business of Sports, we are going to have the pleasure in the next few weeks of getting John Fascitelli, who runs the real estate division, or used to run the real estate division, for Harris Blitzer Sports and Entertainment. He's going to be on our show, and he's going to tell us exactly what he's seeing in terms of this mixed-use real estate around these stadiums. And, of course, it's all about domes.
But
it's all about staying warm.
in your rotisserie league, where you're in last place, in your rotisserie league, do you factor in if somebody has a dome is their home field?
Absolutely. A higher scoring game on turf. Yeah. Absolutely. You're looking for that. So, yes, absolutely. And I look at that, on a Saturday morning, probably just to make sure that that my lineup is set the right way.
What happened to the Seattles yesterday?
The Seattles?
Yeah, the Seattle
Seattles. Geno Smith, huh? I mean, he's something. I mean, look, I picked him up in my fantasy league in my rotisserie. I mean, he's. I don't know if he delivered though. I haven't really checked that this morning, but
no, Mrs. Sassower has. You're doing the dishes tonight. Next.
Okay, Halloween season. You know those big 12-foot skeletons that all these people put on their lawns? Hate them or love them. The problem is that the owners are keeping them on their lawns for more than just the Halloween season. And now HOA letters are going out to these folks because they're saying, hey, you need to get this off your lawn. But the people who bought them for $300 are saying that, you know what, it took me a long time to put this up. So what they're doing is they're changing it. So after Halloween, they put a Santa hat on it, and they keep it through Christmas. Then they put a top hat and extend it to July for, 4th of July. They put it to Sam, a top hat on it.
I mean, look, is there really like an understanding about when you're supposed to take your Halloween, your pumpkins away from your front door? Is it like, the day after, 2 days after, a week after?
I call it common courtesy. I mean, I hate when people have Christmas lights up in like February. Like you just can't do it. But they're saying that this is becoming a legal issue now, and so now, it's this whole fight about how long to keep them up. But their neighbors are saying it's bringing down their property values, and that's a problem.
Major issue.
See? So, especially in those HOA
got
regions.
One more?
The Joker. I don't know if did you guys see it this weekend?
Yeah, bomb.
It did. It didn't make as much as the first. Lady Gaga, Joaquin Phoenix. It's kind of this musical drama, so I don't know
Lucas
if
Shaw wrote it up, and he said, look, $200 million, this is the risk.
It is, and it made $40 million opening weekend domestically. If you look at what the first made, $96.2 million domestically that opening weekend.
Okay.
So a big difference.
Do you see I'm not on my game this morning? Do you know why I'm not on the game?
What's going on?
The older offspring, cash flow, the middle child, Prada, they would have asked first. Afterthought doesn't even ask. She just gets my charge card, and all of a sudden I got Guitar Hero in the house.
Oh, did you play?
I have a no, I did not play. I have a 17-year-old going through, she goes, Mississippi Queen is such a good song. Do you have Guitar Hero in your house?
Well, I don't. My kids are, they're not really into that. They just TikTok all day. But here's the thing, now that you have box office receipts, I mean, tell us about this, Lisa, down 12% year over year.
Yeah.
What are we looking for? What movies are coming up in the second?
Oppenheimer,
Gladiator 2, guys.
No,
Wicked. Those are some of the movies you got to keep an eye on.
There's no Barbenheimer. I know. So that's the struggle.
Gladiator 2.
Yeah. In honor of Guitar Hero, we're having a Guitar Hero day here. You gotta go with this. She's playing Cream. I'm like, does she even know who Eric Clapton is? George Harrison and Ringo Starr helping out on a classic song for Cream. Really can't say enough about it. Have you played Guitar Hero, Damian? I could see.
I played it before. It is fun to play, but I'm not very good at it.
Right. Lisa, I wouldn't even ask.
Better at dancing. I'm better at that dancing.
I have tried it.
Lisa Mateo, thank you for the newspapers this morning. Futures at -25. Stay with us on YouTube on your commute across America.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
We're addicted to the parlor game, the Fed, the monetary ballet.
Where do you see opportunities in a fixed income space here in 24?
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
AI affecting demand for cloud computing.
And Michael Barr with news.
Another legal setback for Donald Trump, this time across the pond.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Paul Sweeney, Tom Keene, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo, Mr. Sweeney on assignment. Damian Sassower in today, which is a good and derivative thing. We're thrilled that he could be with us here. With markets really moving, setting us up for an earnings week as well. VIX out to 21.04. Is a VIX an angsty VIX, or is it just noise?
Remember, we have to wait until the market's open to really get a sense of where the VIX is.
I agree strongly.
So I don't want to jump out and get everybody crazy saying we're up above 20 without seeing where the market opens or where the options market opens. I'm sorry.
We're in the radio business.
I mean, come on.
Some excitement
come on. No excitement here.
We got to keep that.
It's the boring
going.
Market.
Please, it's not
a great time to be alive.
We say good morning on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast when you get to the office. You're commuting, and then pick us up on YouTube. It really works. I mean, you got Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney and all Masser and Stenovic and all that in the afternoon. It's really working out for us. Subscribe to YouTube, Bloomberg Podcasts, and of course, on your commute, Android Auto, Apple CarPlay. Seeing a lot on Apple CarPlay. New software and videos saying these are the 10 tips to using it and that. Good morning, 92.9 FM, Washington, Bloomberg 1130. New York, and 92.9 FM in Boston as well. Let's get right to it from the Interactive Broker Studios. Our Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
And we've got stocks slipping, bond yields extending their rise. Strong economic data push traders to kind of place their bets on how much the Fed might cut interest rates this year. Goldman Sachs economists, they say the probability for a recession over the next year back at the long-term average of 15%. Now today, we'll get an update on consumer credit. Later this week, we'll get the latest read on inflation, September's consumer price index. We'll head to NASDAQ futures down 0.6%. Dow futures, S&P futures both down about 0.4%. The 2-year yield 3.99%. That's up 7 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 3.99%, and that's up about 2 basis points. Commodities, oil, erase that earlier loss. Tensions in the Middle East rising. We have Brent crude $79 a barrel. WTI crude $75 a barrel. Checking in with spot gold higher at $2,657 an ounce. Banks kick off earnings season this week. Reports from JPMorgan Chase, Wells Fargo, BlackRock. That comes out on Friday. PepsiCo, they'll be out with their latest numbers tomorrow. And finally, all eyes on Tesla later this week for its robo-taxi event. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Damian and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. Bloomberg Surveillance, we're brought to you by Cohn Resnick, Advisory Assurance Tax. Discover game-changing strategies to maximize value, optimize performance, and manage risk. Put your business at the forefront. It is October 7th. And maybe for some, October 7th is a beautiful October day. But for many, Damian Sassower, in Israel, it is, may I directly say, their 9/11. October 7th, Damian, with Galit Altstein from the Tel Aviv News Bureau.
Galit, I need to ask you this question. Obviously, we're here on October 7th, and, Israel has yet to retaliate after Iran launched over 200 ballistic missiles at it last week. Are you expecting, in lieu of some of the comments we've seen just here in the U.S. from Biden, do you expect them to go after any of the oil and gas assets? I'm thinking Karg Island in Iran. Is that even a possibility here?
Yeah, so I think that's the million-dollar question. And in terms of the Israeli government, they're keeping the cards very close to the chest at this point about when they're going to attack and what they're going to attack. In news reports here and from what we've been hearing, that is an option that is on the table. And at the same time, as you mentioned yourself, that is something that the U.S. Has encouraged Israel to refrain from at this point. So it remains to be seen whether these sites are attacked or not.
Galit, time for one more question this morning. You cover the economics, the government. It's something I would ask the wonderful Jacob Frankel, the former governor of the Bank of Israel. Galit, how has Israel changed in 365 days as a political entity?
Well, I think one thing that's been very noticeable, and it's noticeable even today, which is, a full-on Memorial Day here in Israel. The atmosphere here is one where schools are, talking to students about the meaning of this day, and local media has totally changed the scheduling of programs and has special broadcasts that go back to the families and the families of the victims of October 7th. So it is indeed a very unusual day here. Now, in terms of the political entity, I would say that right after October 7th, there was a sense of unity here in Israel that kind of glossed over or wiped away, whichever term you'd want to use, a very big division that we saw in politics and in society in Israel just before October 7th last year. And I think that in recent months, this divide has sort of crept up again, it raised its head again. And we're seeing that even today in the memorial ceremonies that are divided between the official to the unofficial ones. And that correlates a lot to those who support and don't support the government.
Galit, before you go, I just have one last question. On the ground, your reaction to Bibi's speech over the weekend when he called out Emmanuel Macron, what's your perception on the G7 and, the lack of support for Israel?
Well, I think that there have been mixed reactions to Israel, and I think that obviously the reactions to the war that's been going on in Gaza for exactly a year now have been harsher than harsher than those the reactions to actions that Israel has taken on other fronts. We've heard that Macron and Netanyahu have spoken after he said what he had said over the weekend, and have at least, on the surface of things, patch things over. But, I think it's no secret that some of Israel's Western allies are very frustrated at the elongated war in Gaza that's been going on for a year now.
Right. Galit, thank you so much. Galit Alstein with us from Tel Aviv here on October 7th, 2024. We now turn to the markets, and we thought we'd turn to someone who's nailed it. Soft landing this, soft landing that. In ancient history, James Bianco said, how about no landing? Joining us now from Chicago, Jim Bianco. Jim, define no landing. How do you frame that across equities, bonds, currencies, commodities?
Remember that Wall Street is a bunch of 15-year-old boys, and we all love airplane metaphors. But a no landing just basically means the economy continues to grow at its potential. It's not showing any serious signs of slowing down. And that any stimulus applied to a no-landing economy, such as rate cuts, puts in the risk of risk of inflation. In contrast to a soft landing, which would be something slower, and a hard landing, which would be a recession.
Jim, what happens to the curve in a no-landing scenario? Does it steepen from here?
Yeah, I think that the curve is going to steepen either way. And the reason I say that is we're in the process of normalizing the curve because I think we're in the process of coming to the understanding that a 4%, maybe a low fives, high threes interest rate, especially Fed funds rate, is normal. It is not necessarily as restrictive as a lot of people believe, and I specifically mean the Federal Reserve. And if it's a normal yield, if it's around the neutral rate, then the yield curve should start to re-steepen out where longer-term rates are higher than the shorter-term rates again. And we're starting to see that happen over the last few months. And then we've got a little bit of a reversal going on with the wake of the payroll report since Friday.
So a bear steepener then, Jim. I have to ask you, for the majority of this beta regime, we've seen a positive correlation between the returns for bonds and stocks. And in this no-landing scenario, I'm curious, do we see that resume? Because as you know, bonds have kind of rallied here in the face of equities being stagnant. I'm just curious to hear your thoughts.
No, I think it does resume. I think, to back up from 2000 to 2020, we had that negative return from bonds and stocks, and that spawned the 60-40 portfolio and risk parity and a lot of beliefs that bonds with their low yield were basically crash insurance. You'd bought them for when the stock market corrected, bonds would rally. That has largely not been the case for the last couple of years. And I think it's the introduction of inflation or inflation concerns that has made them very correlated to each other. So as interest rates move up, bond yields or bond returns, suffer. I think that there will be a trigger point somewhere in there where the stock market has a problem. 2023, April of this year, July of this year, when interest rates, the 10-year yield in specific, started to approach 5 or 4.75, the stock market really struggled and had a couple of 10% corrections in there. If interest rates continue to do that, I would expect something similar.
What will business behavior be with a normalized 4-ish Bianco yield? What do CFOs do? What is the spirit of mid-size and mom-and-pop business?
Well, if they were in business before 2009, they'll remember
it.
They'll remember it. Or if they weren't, maybe they should call their predecessor and ask them what it was like, because we are returning to a pre-financial crisis period in interest rates. We don't have quantitative easing anymore. In fact, we have quantitative tightening. We are gone from the zero interest rate world. But prior to 2009, we had, to use the phrase before, largely a no-landing economy, and we had nominal growth in the 4, 5, or 6% range, and we had interest rates in the 4, 5, or 6% range. I think what business people have to understand is your business should be generating 4, 5, or 6% returns. Now, if you want to borrow, you should be borrowing in that range. And the argument would be, if you're going to borrow, you think you could do better than that average range. And that gone are those periods, unless we get into a severe economic contraction, of 1% or 0 or 2% rates in quantitative easing. That was an era that ended in 2022.
Jim, I love that you mentioned inflation. I mean, we saw TIPS break-evens, 5-year break-evens, surge 11 bips last week to 217. 5-year forward inflation swaps to 250, back from a cycle low of 234 just in mid-September a few weeks back. And now we have inflation on Wednesday. And my question for you, as you look at expectations, 2.3% year over year. I mean, Jim, does anyone even care about inflation in this environment anymore?
Well, I think the Fed cares about inflation, and I think that a lot of people are going to start looking at those numbers. By the way, that 2.3%, there's a base effect in there because last September, crude oil prices were in the mid-90s, and it pushed up September 23's inflation number very high. Right. But after we drop that, I think the 2.3% should be the cycle low as we go forward for the next several months, unless we see $50 crude oil or something like that as we move forward. But I do think it matters. It matters for the Fed, and I think a lot of people are going to be paying attention to those numbers.
Where's your GDP run rate? I mean, you got 3-ish now. I think Jan Hatzius is out at 3.2%, whatever. Where's Jim Bianco's run rate on real GDP, given this no landing scenario?
Somewhere in the high 2s, 2.5 to 3%.
Really?
I think that, and I think that that's what you should expect for a $30 trillion economy that's kind of moving forward from here. And that would be a very good number. That should keep the unemployment rate somewhere around 4%, maybe the high 3s if we get a little bit lucky. And that's a very good rate for a $30 trillion economy to have a 4% or high 3s unemployment rate. And I don't see it really slowing yet unless something changes.
What is Chicago? Rebuild city? The White Sox are rebuilding, James Bianco. And I even read that the Cubs are rebuilding. The Blackhawks are rebuilding. The Bulls. It's rebuild Chicago, isn't it, Jim?
Oh, you're being kind. You mean the city of bad teams. We suffered through 200 losses between our two baseball teams, 121 and 79. It was painful this summer to watch them losing over one game a day at this point.
Well, hold on. The Bears gave you something to cheer about yesterday, at least, no?
Yeah, they're 3-2, but they're still in last place because they play in the toughest division.
Williams, come on, the Caleb Williams show.
Thank you.
He played well. He played well.
Thank you so much. Bianco Research, can't say enough if you didn't figure it out, from Chicago. Good morning.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures falling as tensions in the Middle East dampen optimism about the state of the U.S. economy. Right now, we have NASDAQ futures down 0.4%, Dow futures, S&P futures down about 0.3%. We have the two-year yield, 3.98%. That's up 6 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 3.99%, and that's up 2 basis points. Few companies making news. That's Boeing and its largest union. They'll be back at the bargaining table today. That's along with a federal mediator. They're hoping to end a strike by the company's West Coast factory workers. And speaking of that, Stellantis suing its union to head off a possible strike. It's accusing the United Auto Workers of planning to violate last year's contract agreement, which rules out mid-contract walkouts. And finally, Chevron, it's agreed to sell its stake in oil sands and shale assets to Canadian Natural Resources for $6.5 billion. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now. Wherever you get your podcasts, I'm Lisa Mateo. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Damian.
Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. Joining us now from Washington to report on the moment at hand inside 30 days to the election, Jack Fitzpatrick joins us, Bloomberg Government. Jack, open question to get started. What is the single thing Harris and Trump are focused on this morning?
Well, they both have to be focused this morning on the fact that it's October 7th. We're 1 year after the Hamas attacks in Israel. You can't overlook that. You can't have an unclear message on that. You probably saw in the preview of the 60 Minutes interview, Vice President Harris addresses an important alliance between the American and Israeli people, as she said, but also wanting to push for a ceasefire, wanting to emphasize humanitarian aid. They both have commemoration activities, so that's the number one thing on both candidates' mind
Within
today.
the agony of October 7th, I get it. Will it matter in the in the voting booth? Does foreign policy and Eastern Mediterranean policy, does it translate over to a way someone votes?
Yes, it seems so, and we'll see what the results are on Election Day. But if there were to be one issue that would undermine enthusiasm of young, leaning to say the least, voters, frustration with the Biden administration's level of support for Israel would seem to possibly be that issue. So it's a more dangerous issue on the campaign trail for Harris than Trump because she's got a tougher needle to thread. But it is something that could affect voting behavior, especially if you just look at the dissatisfaction of young voters who would normally vote for a Democrat.
Jack Fitzpatrick, at the risk of sounding foolish on such an important day, October 7th, obviously, I have to take this opportunity to ask you about Melania, her memoir that's going to be hitting, I think, tomorrow, actually. And what sort of impact do you think that will have on Trump's chances in the upcoming election?
It's hard to say if that would have an impact on his chances in the election. There have been reports that the memoir will speak out in favor of access to abortion for women. That's already a very tough issue for Republicans. You look at the 2022 midterm results, that's a very motivating issue for women, for Democrats. That is, I mentioned if there's an issue that could undermine enthusiasm for some Democrats, it may be Israel. If there's a really animating issue that could lead Democrats to outperform the polls, it may be the fallout of the Dobbs decision and the broader issue of access to abortion. The Melania and Donald Trump kind of saga, though, I don't know is on everybody's mind.
Jack, does money matter here? I'm not hearing enough talk about somebody's out, raising money or this or, do they all have enough monies to give the 24/7 TV ads in the important swing states?
You know, it's going to be interesting as we get closer to Election Day how sick of the ads people get in key areas. I will say, as we really get into crunch time, it probably does matter that Harris has a financial advantage. The last numbers I saw heading into September, she had a more than $100 million cash on hand advantage. She had more than $400 million cash on hand. Trump had less than $300 million. That's more than a 33% difference in cash on hand a couple months out is potentially a significant difference maker if you're trying to get on air in expensive ad markets.
Jack, the Supreme Court convenes today, 29 days till the election, and the question on my mind is, will the justices once again find themselves in the middle of this presidential race? Mail-in ballots in Pennsylvania, I'm thinking hurricane accommodations in North Carolina. What are your thoughts there?
It's something they hope not to be involved in. If they can avoid a major 2000 election-like controversy, they would be very happy to. You are right to raise the prospect of voting difficulties in western North Carolina. I'm not sure if that's going to come to the level of a U.S. Supreme Court matter, but logistically it is a significant issue as we get closer to the election. So this is a court that has, I think, experienced enough enough of a political spotlight for now, and if there's anything they can do, they'll try to avoid more of it.
Jeff Fitzpatrick, thank you so much with Bloomberg Government this morning. We're looking at the entirety of the market here into earnings season. Earnings are away from what Damian Sassower does. He's much more in the credit space. What is the underlying tone that Bloomberg Intelligence sees? What's the theme within credit and EM, and for that matter, developing economies as well?
Well, it's funny you should ask. Just Saturday night, I was down in Princeton Junction, New Jersey, with my director of research, with Ira Jersey, our head of rates, with Eric Kazatsky, our head of municipals. And you know what Ira said to me, which I found kind of interesting, is, okay, inflation print's coming up this week. Sure, it's important, but it's retail sales, Tom Keene. It's retail sales and it's the consumer, which is really going to give you a sense of whether or not there's some longevity to some of the data we're seeing on payrolls and for the U.S. growth picture writ large. So, I have to, take him at his word. I'm going to be looking to activity data in the U.S. here going forward.
And it's sort of, the normalization Jim Bianco was talking about is, you and I are of enough vintage to remember normals, read 2006. And are we really going back? There's a huge body of the audience, I think, that doesn't think we're going back to that.
We also have some rate decisions abroad this week, Tom. I mean, we have South Korea at the end of this week, and South Korea could cut rates for the first time this cycle. But look, we have India, Israel, and New Zealand first on Wednesday, Peru on Thursday. Peru's been in a deep cutting cycle. New Zealand started cutting rates already. I mean, we could start to see some of these countries, perhaps like India and South Korea, start to cut rates as well. Rate differentials matter. I'll just leave it at this, Tom. The carry trade, you can't ignore it anymore. If U.S. rates are bouncing back up, the carry trade's going to do well, and it has.
Do you see elements of a race to the bottom and all the damage that can cost?
A race to the bottom in terms of rate differentials, right?
Rate differentials and just frankly, central banks acting not selfishly, but just acting in their own interests.
Absolutely. I mean, look, we saw that brief rally. I mean, look, there were three factors really that drive, FX in my mind: carry, value, and momentum to some extent. And, value has taken the reins there for a bit, but now that seems to be reversing itself, and I do think there is room to, I wouldn't say a free lunch, Tom, but to take advantage of rate differentials in the current environment. I think currencies have moved pretty dramatically in the last few months, and a little bit of reversals in order.
Do you have a euro call?
I think the euro is going to weaken. I hate to say what I think. I'm not supposed to have a call on BI. I don't have a call. I don't matter. But I look at euro yen here, at levels at euro yen, and I think euro yen can weaken from here. Sure.
Why do pros, they triangulate? They don't look at dollar yen. They don't look at euro dollar. The adults go over to euro yen. Why?
So here's the thing. 88% of all FX transactions are a dollar cross, right? I mean, that's just the volume of the $7.5 trillion a day FX market. So you would think it'd be all moves against the dollar. But Tom, you're right to point out that in this environment, all the smart money, they're not looking at dollar. No one wants to go near it.
Get away from the dollar.
Because of the reversal you just saw. I mean, the dollar's going to be because of all the different scenarios that can take place fluctuates between here and next year. So euro's a little bit more of a
regression basis. You're taking out a major coefficient.
That's right.
When you take out dollar.
That's right.
And that stabilizes your epsilon on the far right of the equation.
I think people.
Am I doing okay there?
I think you're doing okay. I think investors are a little bit more confident that the euro growth picture is going to weaken from here on out. There's a little bit more duration in that trade, and the other side of that, I think there's some real belief that the Bank of Japan is going to continue hiking rates, and we're going to see another 25 bip cut in December. So
Sunday evening, I'm having a beverage of my choice, and I'm just saying, how can I bust Damian's chops?
No, he can't.
Monday
Impossible.
morning. Coming up at some point here, we'll go to London. The miracle of the New York Jets on Carnaby Street. Futures negative 22. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures falling after the Dow jumped to a record on Friday. Now, this came after last week's blowout U.S. jobs number undercut chances a big rate cut in November. Today, we'll get some insight on what sort of spending power consumers will have heading into the holiday season with an update on consumer credit. Later this week, we'll get the latest read on inflation, CPI for September. It's expected to have kept up its August pace. Right now, we'll head to NASDAQ futures, down 0.5%. Dow futures, S&P futures down about 0.3%. With the 2-year yield 3.99%, that's up 7 basis points. The 10-year yield at 4.01%, and that's up 4 basis points. To commodities, Brent crude $79 a barrel, WTI crude $75 a barrel. We have spot gold lower at $2,648 an ounce. Stocks on the move. Arcadium Lithium, that's up 31%. There's news that Rio Tinto has made a non-binding takeover approach, and Pfizer up more than 2%. Sources say activist investor Starboard Value, it takes a $1 billion stake in the company. And finally, Cartier owner Richemont up nearly 1% in Switzerland. It agreed to sell its e-commerce arm to online luxury platform My Teresa. It's an all-share deal. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Damian.
Lisa, thanks so much. Usually after the jobs report, it's a quieter week. Not this time around. NFIB coming out. We got some, as Lisa mentioned, we got some consumer credit noise today. CPI on the 10th. PPI, EIO. Michigan sentiment as well coming up here on the 11th. So it's not a mundane week, and you wrap it around earnings as well. From where you sit, Damian, are the banks having a good quarter?
I got to believe they are. We saw a steepening of the curve. Whenever I look at bank earnings, I got to tie it to net interest margins, and it looks like net interest margins are indeed improving. And from think about, they haven't had to reserve for delinquencies and for defaults and things of that nature because the credit market seems pretty healthy. So it's risk on.
Lisa Bramowitz, James Diamond tomorrow, 9:30. Our economic indicators, all the busy weeks, brought to you by Commonwealth, supporting more than 2,000 independent financial advisors with a 2-to-1 advisor to staff ratio, small firm attentiveness, big advisor impact. Go to commonwealth.com to learn about their consultative support in technology. A needed brief at 10-year 4%. Gargi Chaudhuri joins us, Chief Investment and Portfolio Strategist for BlackRock, a small firm in New York. Gargi, I just got to cut to the chase. When somebody trots out, buy the dip, how does Gargi Chaudhuri buy the dip?
Good morning. It's great to be here. So a couple of things when we think about where investors should be focusing. First of all, we've talked about sort of the belly of the fixed income curve. I know we've spoken about this before, and that's certainly an area where we have seen a significant dip over the course of the last week or so. And with yields backing up pretty significantly on the back of some very strong economic data, we think that the income that fixed income markets provide are something to be, definitely taken into consideration and allocated to. If you're an equity investor, I think buying the dip, you haven't really got too many dips, but I certainly think that some of the dynamics of growth, the dynamics of FOMC being quite supportive to the economy, as well as the economy being very strong, all lead us to be pretty bullish.
Gargi, since you've been at BlackRock, have we had a legitimate market correction? I'm kidding.
Of course.
I've been at BlackRock for 14 years. We've certainly had years like 2022 where, as it turned out in hindsight, amazing opportunity to own quality assets.
Well, Gargi, I have to ask you. It's great to have you on talking about bonds and really their ability to serve as a ballast for, global diversified portfolios. I just have to ask you this. High yield, we've seen spreads stay remarkably resilient through this cycle, and high yield has absolutely crushed it. Even just last week, we saw, a backup in IG, but we didn't see a backup in high yield. Talk to us about the resiliency of high yield credit.
Absolutely. So to your point, there's been this tug of war between the level of spreads and the all-in level of yield. So to your point, we haven't really seen that back up. Even in the period, forget about last week, but even in August, when we actually saw a meaningful pullback in risk assets, spreads did widen out, but gave all of that back very quickly. And there are some fundamental reasons behind that. I think in the high yield markets, if you look at negative net supply being something pretty meaningful, default rates remaining low, and very importantly, all-in yields being extremely attractive. Investors are moving towards high yield in an active manner, in a defensive manner. We think that continues.
I just want to say with Gargi, we're going to stay with Gargi because it's too important a conversation. But in honor of my daughter playing Guitar Hero, we got a flange on Gargari's voice, just like Badge in the 60s.
Gargi, I want to stick with that theme of high yield credit. I want to extend that to the equity markets. They've historically done well during rate cutting cycles, but here's my question. Small caps. You've historically seen a correlation between small cap equities and U.S. high yield, but we just haven't seen that this time, at least from a total return perspective. Talk to us about when investors should be looking at building a position in RTY.
Yeah, so we think that right now isn't quite the time for small caps yet, and we've talked about this in our investment directions, our Q4 outlook, where we do think equities make a lot of sense. We do think that high quality equities, large cap value make a lot of sense, but staying away from small caps for a couple of reasons. Number one, mainly it's about earnings. With over 40% of small cap companies actually being in negative earnings territory, it is not quite yet the time to go into indexes that give you exposure to high yield. However, what we have seen in periods is investors buying upside protection. Call volumes in IWM is something that we keep an eye on. That is something that we've seen pick up in certain periods of time. I think that can be an area for investors to get that, that rental income, if you will, in small caps. But till we see a meaningful turn in earnings for small cap names, I think it's very hard to consider a sustained rally in small caps. Where we think there's more, there's a lot more opportunity for us, we believe, is certainly staying within value and cyclicals, but keeping it in large caps, where we think more of the earning growth is going to come in over the next couple of quarters.
Well, you talk about that yawning gap in earnings growth between technology and the rest, and I've read that about. It's just awesome stuff, Gargi. But the move in energy last week. Off the back of what we're seeing in the Middle East, I think we see like a 7-8% move in the S&P energy sub-index. Massive. Talk to us about ExxonMobil, Chevron, and now we're starting to see some M&A activity there. Talk to us about that sector and its ability to kind of lead the market higher from here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, we obviously saw that move, and unfortunately that came behind some of the very tragic events in the Middle East. And we would never tell investors that they should only invest in any parts of the market based on geopolitical activity, because what we see over and over again is markets tend to, over the medium to the long term, look through geopolitical risk. Having said that, I do think given valuations, energy in a portfolio, we were talking about value just a little bit of time ago, owning sectors like energy within that value portion of your portfolio make a lot of sense. And I certainly think that one of the things that has happened in the last 2 years with the rally in the large cap, with the rally in the Magnificent Seven, many investors have fallen short of their allocation to value sectors of the market. They have less value in their portfolio than they think they do just because of the way in which the market has rallied. So I think there is a catch up there. I think, based on valuations, energies have historically been very, very underpriced. But geopolitical is never the only reason to own an area of the market.
Gargi, thank you. Gargi Chaudhuri with us with BlackRock there with a flange going on today. I look at this, Damian, and within the bet, buy the carry trade, whatever, is just simply the battle between growthiness and value.
That's right.
And I've never seen it so odd right now. I don't have a strong opinion which. It's not my job, but I will certainly say it's an odd debate.
Well, I think Gargi makes a good point. The smoke we're seeing in energy markets, with Brent crude and futures markets. I mean, if just a few weeks ago, I was talking that we have to look to commodity markets for direction as to whether or not this economy is globally going to continue to grow at the current pace. And now we have all this noise coming out of the Middle East, and it's really tough to parse through it if you're an investor.
In America, energy is not as important as it used to be.
Fair.
In Indonesia,
of course,
is energy not as important as it used to be.
And here is the point, because emerging markets historically have been very tightly correlated. So as energy markets go up, all the oil producers, the commodity producers, everything goes up as well. But this time around, you've got a lot of big emerging markets like India, like Indonesia to some extent, that are also oil importers. And so, when you have oil prices on their back before, like what we saw the last week, a lot of those economies have done shockingly well. And I think we're going to see some more of that if they can continue to maintain a bit of the resilience despite oil trending higher here.
We'll find time for that with Damian Sassower here sometime between now and the end of the year. Bloomberg Surveillance, it's brought to you by CME Group, the world's leading derivatives marketplace, offering the widest range of global benchmark products across all major asset classes. CME Group, where risk meets opportunity. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Damian, Lisa. Today marks 1 year since Hamas militants crossed from Gaza into Israel, killing over 1,100 people and taking about 250 others hostage. Hamas fired a barrage of rockets toward Tel Aviv after Israel bombed a number of targets connected to the militant group in Gaza as fighting escalated after a year of war. A year on, Israel is locked in a multi-front conflict that many fear could now escalate into an all-out regional war. Speaking to CBS's 60 Minutes, Vice President Kamala Harris was asked whether the Biden administration lacks influence over Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
With all due respect, the better question is, do we have an important alliance between the American people and the Israeli people?
Harris also said Washington will continue to support Israel's military defense. Her 60 Minutes interview is part of a media blitz that includes an interview on the Call Her Daddy podcast and appearances on ABC's The View. Meanwhile, former President Trump campaigning in Wisconsin Sunday at the Dodge County Airport in Juneau, his fourth rally in the state in 9 days.
We're going to recover fast, but if you go 4 more years, you may never recover. In fact, I will say, some people say it, I think it's very severe, but I can understand it. Some people say you'll never have an election again. This would be your last election. And I can see it.
Saturday, Trump spoke in Butler, Pennsylvania, where an assassination attempt took place against him. After Hurricane Helene tore through multiple communities, including parts of Florida earlier this month, officials are once again gearing up for Hurricane Milton this week. Tampa Bay is once again expected to be impacted by landfall. The nation's high court is back in session today. The Supreme Court justices return to the bench to hear a new slate of cases that tackle everything from transgender care, so-called ghost guns, and even adult-themed websites. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Damian, Lisa.
Thanks so much. We'll do baseball on the next hour. I got to bring this up, and now's the time. How's that Aaron Rodgers thing working? Would you like to step in here?
You really want to poke the bear here.
I mean, it's like at least medicate him right now. Give him some time.
I'm not feeling very good this morning. I mean, Nathaniel Hackett really. This is. Was it 3? Oh God! Look. It was 2, but the play calling was just like so bad. So look, as a Jet fan, and I know I speak for the entire Jet Nation out there, we need to do something about quickening up the pace, not getting delay of games, not getting these nonsense penalties, because players know what they're actually going to be, what plays are going to be called. Come on, everybody knew it was going to Mike Williams in the last play of the game, but Mike Williams didn't know. Don't get me started.
Lisa, you better get that medication right now.
Are you like this at the dining? Okay? At the Sassower house, you're usually sitting for 12 at dinner.
It was early.
Are you like this at the dining room table with Mrs. Sassower?
No, I can't be. She would disown me if I was like this. Look, I think she gives me Sundays. My wife she's a good lady there. So
I am going to give Aaron Rodgers just a little bit of love. If he would have thrown the ball ahead of Wilson, it might have been a pass interference call. Yeah. But he threw it behind. And
offensive line didn't look great either, Mr. Barr. You got to have time to throw the ball. It's not all on Aaron Rodgers, who can't run the ball. It's just a mess. The defense looked good.
I got 5 seconds. Which of you is worse in rotisserie?
I am.
For now, he's he makes a play. He usually makes a run toward the end of the season. And Rich Truman, our producer, we don't even talk about him.
Yeah, we'll see. From New York, Bloomberg surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Well, with September's blowout jobs report behind us, investors' focus shifts this week to the latest readings on inflation. We have CPI for September later this week. But first, we have a look at consumer credit later this afternoon. Tomorrow, trade balance. Wednesday, we get minutes from the Fed's September meeting. Let's head to futures. NASDAQ futures down 0.4%. We have Dow and S&P futures down 0.3%. The 2-year yield, 3.99%. That's up 6 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 4.0%, and that's up about 4 basis points. Shares of Nintendo up 4% after Saudi Arabia's wealth fund. They said it's considering increasing its stakes in Japanese game companies. And then you have casino stocks. They're moving a little bit higher after Wynn Resorts received a commercial gaming operator's license in United Arab Emirates. Wynn Resorts up 2%. Las Vegas Sands, they're up more than 2%. And Costco gold bars, they are flying off the shelves. Bullion prices hit records. According to a Bloomberg survey of about 100 of its stores nationwide that sell them, 77% said the bars were sold out in the first week of October. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Damian.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Lisa, have you ever seen at Costco like someone checking out a gold bar?
I have never, and that's what I keep saying. I'm like, where are these people? I don't see them. But a lot of people don't do it online too. So.
They're smaller. They're not like a bar.
No, they're tiny.
They're not like a bar in Goldfinger.
No. What's going up year to date? 25, 26%. Year to date. Wow.
Yeah. Good morning, Dennis Gartman, the greatest call of the decade. Gold, and if you hedge it against yen or euro, particularly the way the yen's weakened here in the last week out to 148.11, Gartman looking absolutely brilliant.
Prescient.
One of the greatest ways to have people turn off a radio broadcast and podcast worldwide is to go into Ricardian economics and comparative advantage. It is deadly. It's the way you get a quality C in international economics. Rodney Ledema and the Georgetown crew have put out a tour de force in Foreign Affairs magazine on the one thing Biden, Harris, and Trump agree on, which is you folks need tariffs. Rodney Ludema joins us now, former State Department, Rodney Ludema, thank you, Ari, State Department Chief Economist. I'm too rattled, Ari, by the commanders, okay? I wasn't thinking straight. Professor Ludema, thank you so much for joining us this morning. I can't say enough about your article. What core economic principle are Biden, Harris, and Trump breaking?
Well, thanks for having me, and shout out to the commanders. Life's good here in Washington these days. So to answer your question, basically what we're saying is that these policies that the Trump administration, the Biden administration, the Trump campaign are touting are based on a fundamentally outdated understanding of how imports from emerging markets relate to the U.S. manufacturing employment. I think the way we like to phrase it is, you've heard the old adage that generals are always preparing to fight the last war, meaning that policymakers tend to be quite backward-looking, basing their strategies on past experience. And that's exactly what's happening right now with our protectionist trade policies.
So, Rodney, you got to clear this up for me, because before Trump was president, nobody in their right mind thought tariffs were the right thing to do, and now everyone believes they're the right thing to do. So something's got to be working there, no?
Well, I think that part of it is our fault on the academic side. I mean, we studies based upon the 1990s and early 2000s did indeed show that, the so-called China shock, the rapid growth of China as an export powerhouse, and the increased reliance on U.S. on those imports did indeed contribute to declines in manufacturing jobs, and that's and nobody's disputing that. But if you look at if you go back to the recovery from the Great Recession, manufacturing employment has been growing pretty much steadily, with the exception of the pandemic,
right.
Ever since. And this is despite the fact that imports from China continue to rise right up until 2018, when Trump started his trade war.
Do you feel, and Professor, we've got some news here we've got to go to, so I'm going to keep it short. Rodney Ludema, what's so important in your essay is we forget about the stuff coming in for us to make complex products. What will China do and others do if we establish substantial tariffs? Will we diminish the stuff coming in for us to manufacture?
Well, yes and no. I mean, if we simply impose tariffs on China itself, what we know is that a lot of we can import these from other places. And indeed, China will set up factories in other places to export to the United States from other places. But if we impose a tariff across the board, which is what candidate Trump has proposed, then yes, we're going to have a serious crisis in manufacturing, because we won't be able to get the input and intermediate inputs that we need in order to make our factories competitive on the world market. Professor, and that's actually going to cost U.S. jobs, not improve it.
Professor Ludema, thank you so much. Greatly appreciate it. With Georgetown University. I'll get this out on Twitter and LinkedIn. It's a really important foundational essay about the two-way traffic of trade. Damian, that's the heart of the matter, and you live this every day, and that we have a U.S. bias with our belief with Singapore.
Yep.
And the answer is it's a two-way street. Always.
Well, protectionist bent, which is what we're talking about here. I mean, it doesn't make sense. I mean, and who does it make sense for? And I think that's the real point here. Yeah, okay, maybe the numbers suggest that the U.S. economy will go slower because, trade will go down from a volume perspective, but what type of trade benefits? And I think that's what the Democrat and Republican parties have both hit on at these 7 swing states. Right. High-end manufacturing matters, and bringing it back onshore is going to have an impact on this upcoming election. I think that's the point.
Last time around, the one thing they agreed on was TPP. We're not going to do it. basically Asia's gone out and done their own TPP without us. Am I right?
That is right. And look, I mean, I think we're going to get a little bit of fuel coming out of Asia. I mean, they've just found a little bit of religion here in terms of how their central banks are behaving. And now we might see them finally start to get a little bit more dovish, start to stimulate again. We're talking about China. We're talking about South Korea and Taiwan. And that could really light things up here as we head into the end of the year.
Your world learned a lot of lessons out of 1998 where they said, we can't trust the West. We got to go it alone. What is their new study, particularly on the Pacific Rim or India, where they say we got to go it alone? What's the thing they're looking at right now?
Well, I think it's really hard. I think there's a lot of, like just the South China Sea, everything that goes hand in hand with that. Border disputes. It's not just between, China and the U.S., China and Taiwan. Sorry, it's the Philippines, it's Indonesia, it's the entire Southeast Asian bloc. And you talk about 1998, and I think about Thailand. It all started with Thailand, right? Basically, they're talking about creating a land bridge to cut off the Strait of Malacca. So there's a lot of things. And by the way, bonds are trading off of that news, Tom. This is real stuff. So, fundamentally, I think the region is shifting, and I think it's going to be positive in the not too distant future. Sure.
One of the great joys, folks, here. Damian lives this every day. He's looking at this at home while he's watching the Jets lose. But you look at the Thai baht, and it's been in a trading range here.
Yeah.
Do you just bet strong Thai baht here on a Pacific Rim renaissance?
So, right, the Thai baht really does trade off of China, right? Because that has become the tourist destination for Chinese households, right? So, and a lot of Chinese money is spent there. It's about tourist flows into Thailand, and that the baht trades off that. But, for them to get a little bit of fundamental juice off the back of that by kind of inserting themselves into this broader picture of supply and logistics and helping this one belt, one road, whatever initiative. This is all very real stuff, and the Thai baht certainly is strengthening, but it is a low yielder, Tom. Yields there are low, and if I am right, and the carry trade's going to find some value here, you're probably going to see the Thai baht weaken.
Have you been to Chiang Mai?
Never.
It's like in northern Thailand. It's like, X-Mile
northern Thailand. Okay. I got to get to Bangkok first.
It's right on the border.
Okay.
With China, it's like a huge tourism place.
By Daishu is going to be my tourist place when I go out east. Okay. It's because that's China. That's where the Beijing elites go.
Yeah, where else nationwide are you going to hear too much on the Thai baht? Only with Damian Sassower. It's Guitar Hero Monday. Leslie, good morning.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Are these stocks under-owned by institutional Wall Street?
A lot of these companies talking about generative AI.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Investors just worried about the ongoing sales slump in China.
And Michael Barr with news.
A ship traveling through the southern Red Sea has been attacked.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo, Sweeney on sabbatical. Damian Sassower fired up. I got a lot of emails in. He was out of control in the New York Jets. We'll try to avoid that in this hour. Instead, we'll look at the New York Giants. I can't believe they beat the Seattles.
That's right. Like, Danny Dimes at it again. You know, I mean, they look pretty good. I mean, the Giants are coming back here. I mean, their offense certainly looks better than my Jets. It's just, I can't believe it's brutal.
Yeah. Why are we doing New York football? Well, that's what we're doing. We say good morning on economics, finance, investment. We'll get to baseball in this hour. We've really avoided that, and it's a glorious time of year to say. The lease, Sam Stovall, with us here in a moment, he's got an incredibly precise note to get you ready for earnings season. JPMorgan leading the earnings charge. Damian says Friday. Lisa Abramowitz in conversation with James Dimon. Look for that tomorrow, 9:30 here. Bramo in London. I mean, you know, she was going anyways to shop. and she said, hey, Jamie, I'm over there. Let's do something. And so that's how they worked it out. Abramowitz and Dimon. Look for that tomorrow, 9:30 here. We're going to get to Sam Stovall in a moment. On YouTube, after your commute, subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts. On Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, Good Morning Washington. New York, Good Morning 92.9 FM in Boston. From the Interactive Brokers Studios, our Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa.
You got it. And stock slipping. Key Treasury bonds rose back above 4%, and this is after strong economic data undercut those bets on big interest rate cut from the Fed. Now, Goldman Sachs economists, they say the probability for a recession over the next year back at the long-term average of 15%. As far as economic data for today, well, we'll get an update on consumer credit. Later this week, we get the latest read on inflation with September's consumer price index. We have NASDAQ futures down 0.5%, Dow futures and S&P futures both down about 0.3%. 10-year U.S. Treasury borrowing cost topped 4% for the first time since August. We'll check in the 10-year yield 4.03%. Now up 6 basis points. A yield on the 2-year 4.02%, and that's up 9 basis points. Commodities, we'll stick with oil right now. Brent crude, $78 a barrel. We have WTI crude at $75 a barrel. Banks kicking off earnings this week. We have reports from JPMorgan Chase, Wells Fargo, BlackRock on Friday. PepsiCo out with its latest numbers. That takes place tomorrow. And all eyes on Tesla later this week for its robo-taxi event. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Damian.
Brent crude up to $79.94 earlier this morning. Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. It is into earnings season, which is when Sam Stovall and CFRA are at their most acute. Here's a single sentence on the racket. Finally, comma, will third quarter become the 60th quarter out of the past 62 in which actual results exceed end-of-quarter estimates? Sam Stovall, how is the earnings season gamed? Is it the companies gaming it? Is it sell-side gaming it? Is it Lisa Mateo's gaming it? What is the racket of 60 out of 62 quarters? OMG, they did better than we expected.
Well, good morning, Tom. Good morning, crew. I think basically management does a very good job of managing expectations. We had actually thought at the on June 30th that third quarter results would be up 8%. Now the estimate is for mid to low 3% gain. This is data coming from S&P Capital IQ consensus estimates. So really the numbers have come down quite dramatically.
Right.
At first, people might worry and say, oh no, what does that really imply for the market? But as my father would say, rarely do you injure yourself falling out of a basement window. So if the earnings estimates are this low to begin with, you really have only upside to go.
Have you given up on double-digit earning growth?
For this quarter, and there are some sectors, in particular healthcare and information technology, that are both expected to post greater than 14% year-on-year results. But there are more sectors that are expected to show slight declines than advances.
Sam, the year is 2001. New York University, West Village. Marty Gruber's asset allocation class, a young Damian Sassower, was listening to you talk about sector selection and its importance in driving portfolio performance. I'd like you to talk to me in today's day and age about factor investment, low vol, momentum, quality, growth, value. These are new sort of factors that seem to be driving market performance, no?
Well, I think what it's showing is that the ETF companies are coming up with strategies really to fit investor behavior. I always like to say that I learned the best about investing from Clint Eastwood when he said that a man's got to know his limitations. So by realizing that your emotions could become your portfolio's worst enemy, if you can extract your emotions by either investing in low volatility, focusing on quality, whatever the risk mitigation results are, that's the better for the investor.
Damian, Clint Eastwood's a level 2 CFA. He didn't get through levels.
Looking down, Sam Stovall looking down the steely barrel of a gun of these markets. Sam, seriously though, dividend and earning yields, they've fallen below treasury yields here. Talk to us about, equity bond market correlations, the 60-40, anything there that we should be keeping an eye on?
Well, I think certainly right now, investors are embracing the core belief that we have a bullish bent at this point. Lower inflation, interest rates that are coming down from the Fed, potential for China stimulus, 14% earnings growth in 2025, and the reduced risk of recession. But to use the airplane metaphor that you guys were talking about earlier in the hour, I think investors now are sort of flying by their instruments because they're seeing, well, wait a minute, 10-year yields are above 4%, oil prices around $66, et cetera. So I think there is a concern that now with a uninverted yield curve, could that be pointing to some challenges ahead?
If you coined a sixth star for Mag 7, I mean, what do you do with Mag 7 within the discipline of the S&P approach?
Well, what you do is you look really and decide why are investors buying the Mag 7. It's really because of 2025 and 2026 earnings growth estimates. And so as a result, I think investors are basically saying, yeah, right now, maybe we do find some concern. We don't want to go dramatically above that 30 multiple. That tends to be a resistance level for this group. But we're looking at 21% earnings growth in 2025 for the S&P 500 tech sector and 17% for 2026, both of which are well above the market.
What do you make of the move in energy just over the last, 3 trading days? That's some move, right? I mean, they've recovered phenomenally. And I'm just curious to hear your thoughts about some of the M&A activity we're seeing there. I mean, from a value perspective, from a dividend yield perspective, is there a place for energy in your portfolio? And is the market kind of underpositioned there?
Yeah, well, I think certainly that energy is an area that looks pretty attractive, but a lot of investors are very impatient and are not willing to be buying something now that will benefit maybe a year or so down the road. Energy is the only sector right now that is actually trading at a discount to its absolute PE over the last 20 years. It's at a 16% discount. And when you look at it on a relative basis, it's at a 38% discount and it joins a majority of other sectors that are trading at double digits.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Cut to the chase, Sam. Is it a value trap or do you climb on board?
That is the $64,000 question. We right now have it underweight because our belief is that with the prospect of China being very slow, with the fact that prior to the spike that we just saw in energy, that oil prices were remaining at or below $70 a barrel, it was implying some sort of future weakness. So we are going to be putting our heads together again to discuss this weighting as of today.
Sam Stovall, thank you so much. Really looking to see where earnings settle out here. Just a brilliant note. We protect the copyright of all of our guests, even when D. Sassower. Get Damian Sassower's work through Bloomberg Intelligence. Get Sam Stovall's wonderful, iconic work through CFRA. We're thrilled he could join us. A nice allusion to his father. I remember the basement window.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah. No,
from Robert Stovall.
Only the $64,000 question. Only the $64,000 question. Flying by the seat of your mechanics.
No, the $64,000 question is that only gets you tuition through the last week of January.
Not if Biden gets through these the student loan stuff that he's trying to get through. So he'll never have to pay. They'll never have to pay.
Not letting up on this policy. The election.
Look, you got to pay your loans back. That's part of it. It's just the American way.
Yes,
it's my opinion.
I'm not going to give you my opinion, folks. I'm not supposed to. Michael Barr will, though. With our news in New York City, here's Michael Barr.
I'm just the newsman. Florida, they're gearing up for a massive evacuation as Hurricane Milton strengthens over warm waters. The exodus jammed freeways and led to hours-long lines at gas stations. Milton is expected to hit by midweek. The state is still cleaning up from Hurricane Helene. Bloomberg meteorologist Rob Carolyn has more about Milton.
Hurricane Milton continues to strengthen rapidly over the southwestern Gulf of Mexico. Sustained winds now 125 miles an hour. It's moving towards the east-southeast at 8 miles an hour. It's now about 745 miles to the west-southwest of Tampa. Over the next couple of days, Milton will become a Category 4 hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico. Landfall again appears to be somewhere around the Tampa Bay area by late Wednesday or Wednesday night. And it could go inland as a very strong Category 3 or Category 4 hurricane. Storm surge will probably be 12 to 18 feet, and several inches of rain are likely ahead of the storm across all of Florida. I'm Rob Carolyn, Bloomberg Radio.
Thank you, Rob. Israelis are holding vigils and somber ceremonies to mark a year since Hamas's October 7th, 2023 attack, killing more than 1,100 people and taking more than 250 hostage. Meanwhile, the health ministry reports over 41,000 people, mostly civilians, have been killed by Israel's offensive in Gaza so far. Vice President Kamala Harris discussed her economic plan in her interview with CBS's 60 Minutes.
My plan is about saying that when you invest in small businesses, you invest in the middle class, and you strengthen America's economy. Small businesses are part of the backbone of America's economy.
The vice president told CBS's Bill Whitaker she'd pay for her plan by ensuring that wealthy Americans pay their fair share in taxes. The full 60 Minutes interview airs tonight at 8 Wall Street time on CBS. Donald Trump, meanwhile, campaigned in Wisconsin yesterday.
We're going to win the state of Wisconsin. We're going to defeat Kamala Harris.
It was Trump's fourth visit to Wisconsin in 8 days. Global news 24 hours a day, and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Damian, Lisa.
Across the nation, internationally, it's real simple. 4 p.m. today, Scooball takes them on for the dreaded Tigers, making up on a game they lost to the Guardians, gave it away. And then it gets even better. One of my favorite pitchers of my life, Rodon, for the Yankees.
Carlos Rodon.
He brings it in high all the time.
This is going to be some good baseball.
I'm nervous about Carlos Rodon on the mound. I'm not going to lie to you. As a Yankee fan, I'm a little bit nervous.
Why?
But how can you be nervous
Why?
when you have Juan Soto and Aaron Judge in the lineup?
Why can't Carlos get it done? I loved him with the Giants.
He was having some difficulty during the season just in getting people out, getting those outs when you need it. This is the playoffs, Tom. This isn't about funny business. You need guys who have some live arms and some action there. And, I'm not saying Carlos doesn't have it, but he's going to have to bring it tonight because the Royals, I think they have Cole Reagans on the mound as well. And
Did you hear
excellent
what
this
Sweeney
year.
did yesterday? Paul Sweeney's coming up at 10 a.m.
Okay.
He did the Buzz Lightyear Space Ranger spin at Disney World.
He's at Disney World.
He's at Disney World.
What's he doing at Disney World?
He's the grandchildren. The grandchildren wanted to go. So Sweeney says, I got to go. Got a junket out of it, plus Bloomberg Radio. It's great. He's a stud. He gets his travel. It's like everything's done.
I can't picture that.
Buzz Lightyear Space Ranger spin. Paul Sweeney in 45 minutes. From New York, Bloomberg Surveillance.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this Bloomberg Futures Report brought to you by IBKR. Markets never sleep, and neither does Interactive Brokers. Discover opportunities with CME Group futures across equity indices, interest rates, FX, energy, and more. Access CME futures around the clock at Interactive Brokers. All right, we've got futures falling. Tensions in the Mideast kind of damping that optimism about the state of the U.S. economy. We have NASDAQ futures down 0.4%. Dow and S&P futures down 0.3%. We have the two-year yield at 3.99%. That's up 6 basis points. A yield on the 10-year 4.02%, and that's up 5 basis points. Few companies making news. That's Chevron. It's agreed to sell its stakes in oil sands shale assets to Canadian Natural Resources for $6.5 billion. Boeing and its machinists union, they're set to resume talks with a federal mediator today as that strike by the company's West Coast factory workers enters its third week. And billionaire Tom Steyer has hired former U.S. Secretary of State and top U.S. climate diplomat John Kerry to join his sustainable investing firm, Galvanize Climate Solutions. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Damian and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. 12 minutes up on the opening here. Futures do better. Negative 27 is now negative 20. NASDAQ futures, let me get that up here. I got to move the mouse didn't set up correctly today. We got to feed the mouse. Negative 0.5% on the NASDAQ 100 futures right now. The VIX was out 2 points, comes in a little bit, 20.93. Jim Glassman was iconic at JPMorgan for original thinking on the American labor economy. His work on teenage unemployment was world class. And you know, this is a folly, Damian.
Absolutely.
He's retired. Okay, he's not retired. He delivered to me this morning a 49-page PowerPoint. Who in God's name is retired and delivers a 49-page PhD Northwestern PowerPoint? Jim, great to have you back on the show. I'm just
nice
going
to be back, Tom.
Yeah, I'm going to look at one of your charts here. Aggregate hours worked. I'm sorry, we're beyond the pandemic. Is our labor economy beyond the pandemic?
I think so. It's pretty impressive, actually, how we've roped our way out of this. And employment has been growing about 25,000 more a month than it was for the previous cycle. Probably immigration is behind all of this, but I think what these numbers show us is that we're out of the woods. We're back in the groove and doing much better than people worried with the Fed doing what they were doing.
Open question. Which is the most important chart out of 49 pages for Jim Glassman? Which is the part where you go, OMG?
I'll tell you, there's one. And that's the picture on how much of the pie goes to workers and the share of income that goes to workers. So you would think that if labor markets are so tight and you got people retiring, and you would think the wind would be at the back of the labor sector. But in fact, the share of income going to them has come down from before the pandemic, and really it's been coming down for the last 25 years. And I think that tells you something really important about the dynamic that's playing out. It's all about technology and the changes in the U.S. economy. And it exposes a real weakness in the thought process in the economics community about the role of labor. We sort of came out of school with this idea that if labor markets are tight, that can be inflationary. But when you see what's going on and you think about all the changes going on in the economy, how competitive it's become, what's going on with technology, it's becoming more clear to me that we got this story backwards. It's really wages don't drive prices. It's more that prices are driving wages. And that picture tells you that if you're worried about tight labor markets are not inflationary if the share of the pie going to workers is not really down.
Jim, you're no longer at JPMorgan, but my goodness, I listen to those guys every day, all day, every week. And Jay Barry just moved his call for 50 bips at the next meeting to 25 bips. Everybody's sort of reevaluating where terminal Fed funds are going to end at this cycle. My question to you is just how low will interest rates go here in the U.S.?
Yeah, I don't think, the reason we're backing off is because the labor market seems like it's doing better. And people think, well, no, there's not going to be a case for making big moves down. I think none of us really knows where the neutral rate of the Fed funds rate is. My guess is the terminal rate's around 3%. If you ask most Fed people, I'll bet most of them will tell you that's where we should be in the long run, now that this inflation scare has really kind of disappeared. So I don't think it's about, I don't think, when you get the kind of data we're getting, it tells you there's no big rush to get there. But the debate about the Fed is not about today's economy or today's labor market. It's about where do you think they should be in the long run if they don't want to do trouble for the economy.
What you just heard there, folks, from Jim Glassman was an absolute tour de force of all that he is and the classic work with Professor Gordon at Northwestern years ago. So to pick up on Trichet and his famous word, the engineer from Lyon, Jim Glassman is diffuse. Does our technological miracle in a declining labor share, does that diffuse out to all Americans? Or are we setting up a Luddite America out of the early 19th century?
Yeah, it doesn't diffuse to everybody, does it? Because this technology, the digital revolution, now the second wave here is AI. It's really, what it means is that more of the income is flowing through to the equity market. And anyone who holds a share, now everybody could hold shares of equity, but they don't. So I think it's the reason why you're seeing this widening in the income gap in the last 25 years, which is driving a lot of the politics of the country. And this is not just a U.S. phenomenon, it's happening everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, we have to be concerned about it because when you live in a democracy, everybody has a say. And if not everybody's on board, then you can get calls for policies that don't necessarily help you, but they just are crying for help.
Jim, I love that you mentioned prices lead wages there. And this regime shift, whereas the Fed sort of focus shifted from growth to inflation, is quite real, and it had negative implications for U.S. rest of world yield differentials and the like. How do you look at this market? How do you look at, this sort of shifting beta regime, one where the Fed is focused on inflation to one that is focused on growth? Does that have any legs to it?
Yeah, although I think for the equity market and valuation, I don't think the Fed is really the issue. It is in the short term, but frankly, what matters for the equity market is do these valuations make sense given what's going on? Well, I'll tell you, the one thing that the elephant in the room for me is if you look at profits over the past 100 years, prior to the millennium, after-tax profits averaged about 6% of GDP. After the late 1990s, the internet revolution, and now we've got the AI revolution, that share of after-tax profits going to is run up about from 6% to 10% or more. And we just got a stunning set of reports that come up within the last month. And I think it tells you there's something real going on. Everybody's been telling me, don't get crazy about this because everything reverts to normal. I don't know where the normal is. It's not where we were. It's a new place, and I think that's a footprint of the technology.
Right, Jim Glassman. Let's do it monthly. Just hugely valuable. Dr. Glassman, now Asian. Jim, quickly here, Padres or Dodgers?
Well, you have to go with it's all about the laundry, isn't it? I'm in LA, so it's got to be about the Dodgers.
Okay. Well, we'll have to see. Last night was not there. To say the least. Dr. Glassman, thank you so much. Can't say enough about it. 49-page PowerPoint.
No, he's not retired. No, he's not busy at all.
These guys just, Ethan Harris, the same thing.
Yeah.
Ethan Harris is like at Lehman, and then he's, you read every word, and then he's at Bank of America.
I get these recovering EM guys calling me all the time. They're bored. They're sitting on their beach. They're sitting at the beach house in Amagansett, and they're bored, Tom. They want to do stuff.
They are. That's exactly right. And they're hugely productive. And now that they don't have the shingle out for the bank, Glassman there was textbook. We'll feature that in Single Best Idea today. That was classic.
Yeah, he was
Northwestern labor economics.
I wonder if he listens to Bruce Kasman and Joe Lupton on the weekend. Because, I listen to that religiously. Save Joe Lupton, will you please? My God, Joe that Lupton man is just, he is the best.
He's got the fixed income angle going into it.
Oh, he's so good.
He's like Zach Pandel, same thing.
Yeah,
years ago. This is all Lehman X stuff. Damian, thank you so much. Greatly appreciate that.
Thank you.
We're going to continue. Lots more to do. We got to get the market open here. Futures improve at -19. A trend up. The VIX 20.93. From New York City on YouTube, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
In the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo alongside Tom Keene and Damian Sassower with your opening bell report. So we have more economic data out this week after the monthly U.S. jobs number really blew past expectations last week. Today, it's an update on consumer credit, but the attention really turns later this week. September CPI report. Also, banks kick off earnings this week. Let's see how things kick off to start this new trading week. Let's start with the S&P 500, down 0.2%, 14 points at 5,736. We have the Dow down 0.3%, 137 points, 42,219. The Nasdaq down 0.3%, 52 points at 18,085. We'll head to the two-year yield, 3.99%. That's up 7 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 4.02%, and that's up 5 basis points. Quick check of commodities. We have spot gold lower, $2,646 an ounce. We have Brent crude, $79 a barrel. WTI crude, $75 a barrel. As we look at currencies, the dollar weaker, Japanese yen stronger. We have the euro, British pound weaker, Bitcoin up about 0.7% at around 63,000. That is your Bloomberg opening bell report. Tom and Damian.
Thanks so much, Lisa. I was out in Jackson Hole, sitting on the couch, near the grizzly bear. Nicholas from Barron's sits down. He's a great Fed reporter, does some serious work. And he says, Tom, your mother read Barron's cover to cover every Saturday. You should read Barron's every cover to cover. So I get, I got a new thing going, like Pharaoh.
Abelson.
I'm reading.
Abelson's not in there.
Alan Abelson's still not in there. But, they got some things going. And the whole thing is the gossip on what people are doing with stocks, which I really don't cover, folks. It's not like where my head is. So we got to have somebody in here, Barron's, like Joe Mazzola joins right now, head of trading and derivative strategy at Charles Schwab. Joe, I love this single line in your research note. Clients bought NVIDIA, Palantir, Intel, Google, and Microsoft. Joe Mazzola, Mag 7's not dead, is it?
It's not dead, guys, but I got to tell you, one of the things that I noticed about the September report in particular was there was a divergence, and a pretty steep divergence between what we saw in the performance of the S&P 500 versus what we saw in the stacks. So they were very selective in their buying, Tom. But, we actually saw a decent amount of pullbacks from equity holders and maybe rotation in mutual funds, ETFs, and particularly into fixed income. So not the dip buying that we saw in August, which I think was a real big divergence from what we've seen before.
What do you see in cash? I mean, let's close the loop here. I'm seeing charts that are showing record money market fund, but what are you seeing at Charles Schwab in our commitment to the triple leveraged all cash ETF?
Well, there is some movement back into, like I said, some of the other sectors, whether it be mutual funds, ETFs, or fixed income. I think, as we get closer and closer to more Fed activity, I think that the 50 basis point cut in September probably prompted a little bit of activity back into the fixed income markets, where people might be just saying, hey, we need to hop in here now before it's too late. I think we saw that back in August, and we've seen that carry forward in September as well. So I think that is, one of the bigger carryovers that we've seen between the 2 months. But like I said, I think my biggest takeaway, and this is really kind of shocking to me, because we had seen that dip buying pretty much all the way through the last year and a half, right? Where we get some pullbacks, and there was dip buying, and there was beta along the way. Clients were really interested in taking on some of those Mag 7 names, and you mentioned some of them at the beginning, but it hasn't been broad based. It's really been concentrated into a few names. We have seen some take them off the table too in other ones.
Joe, how cute is Tom Keene asking about what investors are buying? Because you and I both know it's not what matters is buying. It's selling. What are investors selling? And I'm looking at your recent statement, Tesla, AMD, Alibaba. Chinese equities have had a pretty good run here. What are your thoughts?
So I use acronyms to help me remember things before I'm about to hop on. So I went with TAB for that one, right? Tesla, AMD, and Alibaba. What was interesting, particularly, let's just start with Alibaba, right? I mean, you got that huge move throughout the course of the month, and it could be one of those things to where clients had just been waiting for an opportunity to trim once they got that big pop off the Chinese stimulus move. AMD.
I mean, is it just a trade, Joe? Is the Chinese is this just a trade in Chinese equities? Light positioning, light liquidity, just a move, maybe some official buying in there. I mean, what are your thoughts? I mean, are investors really willing to put their money where their mouth is when it comes to China?
Well, I think part of it, Damian, is some of the short interest that had built up in a lot of those names. And once that kind of cleared off, you got that big pop.
Is it cleared, Joe? But you nailed it, Joe. It was one massive Pacific Rim short cover. Is it done?
Yeah. The short covering I probably will abate a bit, but my thoughts on whether or not you continue to see money move into that. What I've seen recently is really more money moving into the option space within the Asian Pacific Rim, where clients are maybe saying, as opposed to buying the equities outright, it might make better sense to maybe optimize those returns by buying call spreads or something like that. That's where we're starting to see some of that liquidity.
Which is sort of like a cyclical semiconductor trade, right? Because you're betting on some of those semiconductor names out of there, out of Taiwan and South Korea. But I mean, it's interesting to me. I mean, and we have to talk about the move in energy stocks last week. I mean, maybe that as well was a bit of light positioning, right? A little bit of, liquidity, technical driven rally there. I mean, what are your thoughts on this move in energy? Any durability here?
Well, interesting that you bring that up, because of September, that was one of the two sectors that actually saw the biggest inflows was energy and staples. So, to me, that shows a little bit of de-risking from clients when they're in those two sectors. But at the same time, with that oil pop, once again, I go back to the options activity, and that's a lot of activity that I'm seeing there is people are kind of buying that upside, expecting this to continue. And I think you're also seeing that in terms of what you're seeing in the VIX and what you're seeing in some of the hedging and some of the S&P 500 products.
Joe, you're nailing it here. I mean, the volume of bullish Brent calls $100 and above have risen pretty substantially, and they didn't do that last year, right? After October 7th when Hamas initially attacked Israel. Talk to us about the potential for some disruptions in oil production. I mean, we don't know, how Israel possibly would retaliate, but what are your thoughts here for commodities writ large? I mean, we've seen the move in materials, we've seen the move in energy. Just, is there anything more there that investors should be looking at?
Well, last week we saw crude up 8%, right? So, that I think part of that was priced in. I don't think they've priced in severe disruptions at this point. That's when you start seeing, as you mentioned, Damon, those par, the 100 strike call buying up above. That's when you really start seeing more and more of those trades come to fruition. Haven't seen that at this point yet. It's starting, but I think we're still kind of pricing in at least maybe some of that tension abating a bit.
What did you learn as yields came down about movement out of money market funds? You had a little bit of a lab experiment going on there. Joe Mazzola, was there a elasticity to people moving their money out into alternatives with that move down or not?
Not to the extent that maybe I expected, just because, like I said, there was a rotation out of equities. But I think that probably has a little bit more to do with maybe some of the seasonality of the markets. I think markets got a little bit spooked in September. That first week of September, we had a 4% drawdown in the S&P 500. And like I said, what was different this time is we didn't see those dip buyers stepping back in, where maybe they would be rotating some of the cash into the equity markets at that point. If anything, really by the kind of the mid-month, kind of the end of the month, it really just seemed like investors were kind of sitting on their hands. So I haven't really seen that move that you're mentioning.
Thanks so much, Joe Mazzola. Greatly appreciate it with Charles Schwab today. Damian, your thoughts there on what we heard?
I think there's some fundamentally driven rally that no one's really talking about here with the energy market. Let me tell you what I mean here. $4.4 billion barrels. That's the lowest on record since Kepler began tracking data. I'm talking global oil inventories here. 4.4 billion barrels. That's it. The lowest since January of 2017. And if you look at OECD crude and liquid inventories, they're well below their 5-year averages and medians. So, I'm looking at crude oil here, and I'm looking at the energy complex, and I'm saying, there may be some more juice left.
Well, we'll have to see. I mean, we'll get some troops here. Paul Sankey will come in. We were trying to get Ed Morse in. He's like Jim Glassman. Ed Morse is retired. Are you kidding me? We'll do some more on hydrocarbons here. We haven't had an 80 print right now. Brent crude, 79.15. The Dow, negative 144. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Damian, and Lisa. And all I can say is, wow, about Milton. It has exploded in power to become a major hurricane churning toward Florida's western coastline, prompting evacuations and storm surge watches in a region that is still recovering from Helene's devastation. Milton is now a Category 4 storm. Keep in mind, Milton was a Category 1 early this morning. The U.S. National Hurricane Center said its intensity in the Gulf has more than doubled in the past 24 hours, and it's expected to become even stronger before making landfall late on Wednesday. Meanwhile, former President Trump has been criticizing the federal response to Hurricane Helene. FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell responded to Trump's comments on MSNBC.
It's frankly disappointing that we're having to deal with this narrative. And the fact that there's a few leaders that are having a hard time telling the difference between fact and fiction is creating an impedance to our ability to actually get people the help they need.
Criswell criticized those who politicize the crisis. Today marks 1 year since Hamas militants crossed from Gaza into Israel, killing over 1,100 people and taking about 250 others hostage. Israel's subsequent offensive in Gaza remains ongoing with no sign of a diplomatic solution. Vice President Kamala Harris discussed her economic plan in her interview with CBS's 60 Minutes. She says it's about investing in small business and the middle class. Correspondent Bill Whitaker asked the vice president how she'd pay for it.
Well, one of the things is I'm going to make sure that the richest among us who can afford it pay their fair share in taxes. It is not right that teachers and nurses and firefighters are paying a higher tax rate than billionaires and the biggest corporations.
Vice President Harris's full 60 Minutes interview airs tonight at 8 Wall Street time on CBS. Former President Trump was campaigning in Wisconsin Sunday. He told a rally at the Dodge County Airport in Juneau he's confident of a win on Election Day, now less than a month away.
They say that Wisconsin is probably the toughest of the swing states to win. I don't think so at all. I don't think so.
It's Trump's fourth rally in the swing state in 9 days. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Damian, Lisa.
I'm getting used to this AI thing on Google, and I got to admit, I was skeptical. It's going to be a value add. Woodwell Climate. With a brief here, they seem to, they're not like doing the politics of it. They're just like saying, what's the weather? Damian, since 1975, the number of Category 4 to 5 cyclones has roughly doubled. And it's because of the water temperature. I did a couple of interviews on this years ago.
I mean, that makes sense. That's how science works. That's how physics works, Tom. But I mean, you're talking about cyclones. We're talking about hurricanes over here.
Yeah,
I mean, this is
they're in another hemisphere.
A little bit of a different thing. No, I'm just kidding. It's the same thing, and it all does have to do with the temperature of the water. And what I believe is, you see a record drought in Brazil, and you see the agricultural sector on its, proverbial here. And I think there's some room if you want to see sort of this commodity rally expand. You're going to see it expand into the agricultures, into grains, into softs. I mean, there's some real stuff going on there, Tom.
Got a great chart of sea level rise by 2050. Michael Barr's backyard where the deer and the antelope play, inundated.
Yeah. They love it there. I tell you, a bear also ran through our yard. My wife called me, and she said, be careful, because don't go in the garage just yet. And I'm ready to turn in, and a bear and her mama cub just
You're not letting the Fido outside the house.
No,
the little dog,
Lordy.
that little yap you've got.
No.
It's like Wild Kingdom out there.
It is. Yeah, there's a photo I have of wild turkeys to the left and deer to the right.
Do you have rattlesnakes there? Have you ever heard a rattlesnake in the backyard?
We had a diamondback.
Damian, I mean, we're just so cityfied.
Well, I mean, you mentioned about water, the level of the sea. I mean, Solomon Islands.
Serious
Have you ever
stuff.
been there? Have you ever been to Tonga, any of the Micronesia, the Polynesia, all these little islands there? I mean, they're underwater.
Well, Boston, up
Seriously.
I think it was the Boston Globe had a nice treatment on the last, storm from the east. The way it flooded New England was different than before.
Yeah.
It had a certain impulse to it. Thank you for that, Michael Barr.
Yeah,
It'll
Michael
be
Barr,
interesting to see, and we'll hope to get Rob Carolyn in as we look at Hurricane Milton. It's more vicious than Hurricane Chaudhuri.
Well, I'm flying to Brazil next week, so hopefully it's passed through by then. I hate turbulence.
You're going to Brazil?
Yeah.
Another
We
job.
hired a
You and
LatAm rates
Sweeney?
guy, LatAm rates and FX guy. Got to break them in.
Break him in?
Yeah.
And now Brazil, are they going to get Twitter back? That's what more important.
I don't know. That's a good question. I'm gonna have to really boots on the ground. Haven't been down there since 1995. We'll see.
Damian Sassower's Travel. Good morning, everyone.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Stocks slipping, key Treasury bond yields rising back above 4%. Traders kind of trimming their bets on rate cuts from the Fed. Right now, we have NASDAQ futures down 0.4% at 18,052. We have the Dow down 0.3%, 147 points at 42,205. The S&P 500 down 0.3% at 5,730. The two-year yield 3.97%. That's up 4 basis points. The 10-year yield 4.00%, and that's up about 3 basis points. To commodities, we have Brent crude 79.49 an ounce. We have a barrel. WTI crude $75 a barrel. Shares of Apple, they're lower. They're down about 0.6%. An analyst from Jefferies said the high expectations for the iPhone 16 and 17, well, they're just premature. And shares of Amazon, they're down nearly 3%. That's after a downgrade from Wells Fargo. They said the company faces multiple headwinds and that its cloud strength is just not enough. And I thought this was interesting. Switching jobs could bring a boost to your pay, but the Wall Street Journal is saying it can also put a $300,000 dent in your retirement savings. New research is from Vanguard. It shows the majority of those who change jobs, well, they forget to sign up for the 401k plan, or they just get auto-enrolled at a lower savings rate. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Damian.
Lisa, that's important. Thanks so much. Shout out to Peter Orzag, driving the ship at Lazard right now. Peter, out of LSD, did really groundbreaking work on our shattered retirement system, and that pick up your 401k. Get the, this is just basic, folks. Get the match. It's just that simple.
That's right.
And start before 42
Buy some
years
whole life
old,
insurance while you're at
which
it.
is where the chip is. Yeah, get a little life insurance as well. Your financial planning for the day. This is really important right now. Alex Steele survived at Disney World. She survived the Barnstormer. She made the height limit, 35 inches. And the Barnstormer's out there. Paul Sweeney and Alex Steele coming up. And of course, with Commonwealth supporting more than 2,000 independent financial advisors and supporting the tickets for Disney World yesterday for Paul Sweeney and Alex Steele. That must have been something. Have you been?
Have I been? Of course I've been.
I've
been
never been.
You've never been to Disney
I
World?
always get a secret.
Or Disneyland.
I'm sorry.
What about Hershey Park? You've been to
No,
Hershey Park.
I don't have a life.
Are you kidding me?
Do you want Tom Keene to go
How do
to
you know
Hershey
about the
Park?
height? How does he know about the height situation when you want to go on a ride if he's never been?
Because he's too tall to fit into a ride.
My daughter was a Kit Kat. They wouldn't let her on the flume. It was a big deal. I got in a fight with them.
Right. Well, we look forward. Paul Sweeney and Alex Steele coming to you from the Commonwealth event here, Commonwealth's National Conference, that in Orlando, Florida. Look for that in 12 minutes. Right now, hugely anticipated, Terry Haynes with us with a really sharp note yesterday on the distance to November 5th. Terry Haynes, what did your note say yesterday? Give us a brief.
Oh, yesterday I didn't write much about November 5th. I mean, the race is where it is. I saw Harris 60% likely to win, but with a split Congress politically, that ends up with higher fiscal, higher debt, higher deficit, probably higher taxes in 2026 and higher defense spending. Beyond that, though, what I wanted to point out for markets is that tariffs are increasingly going to get used as defense policy, and I don't think that shift is apparent to markets yet. But the warning bell really ended up being the European Union's tariffs on China, and very much similar kinds of things are coming next year.
In your study at Pangea Policy, is there any efficacy to a little bit of tariffs, or is it yes or no on tariffs?
Well, it's yes or no on tariffs, and it depends on, frankly, the relationship of the industry to either defense straight up or defense industrial base. But what I'd be looking at is there's a bipartisan desire, among other things, to really focus on reshoring United States businesses. You heard Vance and Walz agree on that last week. These campaigns agree on that. And they agree on it for defense purposes, frankly. So my urging to markets is basically get out of the thought process where this is about economic tit for tat somehow, and start thinking about it more as policymakers thinking about the industrial base of the United States is under attack, and they will respond accordingly.
Well, let's go there, Terry. I mean, I'm going to quote you here. The new bullishness on China's post-stimulus economy ignores both the predatory intent of Chinese government economic priorities and the continued less than optimal conditions for Western businesses operating in China. Terry, I mean, has nothing changed here? I mean, we saw a rally in not only the equity market, the bond market, but the currency as well. I mean, are markets overdone here? I mean, should we really look at fundamentally nothing has changed underneath the surface here in China?
Well, because I think it hasn't. You've got stimulus. You've got stimulus involved that make Chinese markets, in particular stocks, look like better bets. Fine, stipulated. But the bottom line is that there has been China flight for all kinds of fundamental reasons, and those reasons hasn't changed, and they're not going to change. And I'm a habitual reader of Xi Jinping's speeches and comments at plenums, and the strategy not only hasn't changed, they're actually doubling down on the idea that among other things, aggressive exports really help attack the economic foundations of the West.
And I agree with you, Terry. I mean, a government-led economy as opposed to a private sector-led economy. I mean, I agree with you. But here's the thing. Equity markets might not, right? I mean, you have Goldman Sachs on the tape this morning saying there could be another 20% move here in Chinese equities, and who cares who it's driven by, if it's official buying or whatever. If you're an investor there, you're making 20%, currency with notwithstanding. I mean, should investors be looking at it? Should they have some exposure to it? I mean, even if only from a tactical perspective?
My experience with markets, and they may, your mileage may vary, as they say, but so I asked a client once, he asked me about the short, medium, and long-term look at some policy. And I said, okay, I'm going to assume what you mean by short is today. By medium, you mean like by Wednesday. And long-term is by the end of the week or Monday, perhaps. And the guy didn't even blink and said, yes, and. So, I'm talking about maybe weeks, months. But what I'm talking about also is, the market shouldn't think that everything got reversed, because it didn't. There's a short-term bump based on particular circumstances and nothing more. And go get profits and take them by all means, but still.
Right, Terry. Quickly here, Nate Cohen at the New York Times out today, really questioning methods of polls. Is there a good poll to Terry Haynes? Is there some poll we should focus on?
Not particularly. I look at a bunch, and what I look at is really two things. One is likely voter polls, which now we're into registered. I preached to you and Damian and Paul all summer that registered voter polls didn't mean anything because there's a third of registered voters didn't vote the last time. So, why do we take these to the bank? But I look at likely voters, and I look at frankly, the sample size, because the larger the sample size, the better it's going to be. But understand, in closing, that pollsters in the United Kingdom in the July 4th election missed the labor percentage by 5 percentage points. So none of this in the United States should be taken to the bank. It's more than sentiment, but that's all it is.
Wisdom. Terry Haynes, thank you so much. Pangea policy there. I can't say enough about whether it's the United Kingdom experience or others, Damon. I don't trust the polls.
No, I mean,
I like Bloomberg's 6,000 count, just as he says, legit sample size. Other than that, it's tough.
And I'm going to Brazil next week. You want to talk about polling? I mean, El Globo, forget about it. And look, I mean, I take your point. It's these 7 swing states, and what's going to motivate them? And from what I'm hearing from the people who know what they're talking about, it's Roe v. Wade, Tom. I mean, it's the female vote that's going to carry the way, and who is going to carry the narrative? And that's why I think tomorrow's release of Melania's memoir might be more relevant than people give it credit for.
Program note: Lisa Abramowitz in conversation with James Dimon from London. We'll do that tomorrow at 9:30 during the show. A lot of questions there, particularly, one is just basic, this endorsement thing with Mr. Dimon. Did he endorse someone or did he not? But I'm way more interested in Q3. Get out front of the Jamie Dimon conference call extravaganza. This has been good.
Yeah.
Thank you for the comments on
Thanks
Vanderbilt.
for having me. It's been fun.
The Vanderbilt, it was expected, right?
I guess, Vandy, it wasn't expected. I got to be honest with you. But I mean, it was really fun. My son called me, and, I never get to talk to him anymore. So that was fun.
We're doing Guitar Hero. Alex Steele is awesome at Guitar Hero.
Yeah.
Green-Eyed Lady, Sugarloaf from a few years ago.
Green-eyed lady, lovely lady, strolling slowly towards the sun. Green-eyed lady, ocean